Hello friends. About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be really happy if you do so. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. So this happened about 5 years ago in my home state at around 3 p.m. It had been storming all day, so it was fairly dark and creepy out. I drove out of my neighborhood and was only a few blocks away when I stopped at a four-way intersection with all four sides having a stop sign. As I waited for two vehicles to cross the intersection, I was glancing at my phone to make sure I wasn't running late. Something caught my eye as the two cars passed each other. My left and right were light woods with neighborhoods behind them. I could see something bright red in the forest to my left. I looked up at my phone just as a very unkempt lady came rushing through the tree line and lost her footing and fell face first and hard onto the cement road. I was next to go through the intersection but knew I needed to make sure this lady was okay. I got out of my car. At the time I was 22, female, 5'2", 100 pounds, and the first thing I noticed was that she hadn't moved at all since hitting the concrete, and two, that she was only wearing a light nightgown with no shoes or socks even though it was freezing and storming. I walked slowly up to her and was repeating, "Ma'am, are you okay? Ma'am?" Without moving any other body part. Then her neck, she scraped her face against the concrete to crane her neck and make eye contact with me. She looked, the best word I can think of is crazy. She looked completely insane. As we made eye contact, she started pushing herself up with her arms. I was saying, "Ma'am, maybe don't move. I'm going to call 911. Just stay put till they get here. You might have really hurt your head on that fall. Do you need something? I have a blanket in my car." She is struggling to get to her feet as I'm repeating this to her. I pull out my phone to dial 911, and as I do, she somehow finds her footing and is standing about 9 feet from me, just staring. By now, another car is pulled behind me and was asking if we were okay. I turn to the driver to explain what was going on, and as I do, I can hear footsteps on the pavement. I look back towards the old lady, and she's charging at me as fast as she can. I make a little yelp noise and try talking to her again to calm down, and I was here to help. Her eyes made it obvious she had no idea what I was saying and started grabbing my hair and clothes and pulling me towards to the woods, saying inaudible things. The man in the other car got out and got us disconnected, and I ran to my car and locked the door. She was trying to get past him and back to me, but he finally got her to sit down. I could hear sirens in the distance. I rolled my window down and handed the man a bottle of water and blanket and told him the sirens are for the lady bit, that I was freaked out and had to leave. I drove slowly past the man and seated lady through the intersection, and in my rearview mirror I could still see her staring at my car as I drove away. So it happened about 2-3 years ago. Me and two of my friends decide to go camping in the forest behind one of their houses. We walked about 6 miles and found an old-looking log cabin. We decide to sleep there for the night. The first thing that should have made us go back to his house was the fact that the inside looked decently cleaned. Not like clean, but no mold, rotted floorboards, and no rusty nails or rodents. Us being stupid teenagers, we thought it would be awesome. He had his own log cabin. But nope, not his, someone else's cabin. We will meet him later. So fast forward to about 9 or 10 at night. We were drinking and doing pot, just talking and having a generally good time. Then one of my buddies, there were 3 of us, looked at one of the windows and turned pale. We noticed this and asked him what was wrong. He said, hey, thought he saw someone in the window. We told him he had too much to drink and to go to bed. There was one twin-size bed. He said okay and went to sleep. Me and the other went to sleep about 2 hours later. Let's keep in mind we had some alcohol and pot, but we were able to think kinda straight. Fast forward again to later that night. I woke up to the door opening and looked and saw someone coming in. I just assumed that it was one of the guys until I saw one in the bed and the other right next to me a few feet away. My friend next to me was apparently seeing the same thing I was because he let out a little squeal of fear and rapid heavy breathing. I was doing no better myself. I was biting my tongue, trying not to scream. The man walks over to us and crouches down and starts stroking our hair. Our fucking hair. After a few agonizingly long minutes, he stops and walks to the corner of the room and removes his pants and starts masturbating while looking at us the whole time. I tried to move, but I could not move at all. You know the term paralyzed with fear? Well, it's apparently a real thing. So once he finished, he walked over to us and stood there for a few seconds and stared at us. He walked out very soon after, and even though he had not done anything to us, we were very exhausted with the fear and adrenaline. I literally passed out once he left. So the next morning I asked my friends if they saw something, and the one beside me said he saw the exact same damn thing. The one in the bed slept through it, lucky son of a bitch. 30 minutes after we woke up, we packed our shit and ran. While running, one of my friends screamed and pointed to the shrubs to our right, and we all saw the man. He looked like he was in his 50s or 60s, gray hair, and a torn pair of jeans. We ran as fast as we could back to his house. I regret this now, but we never told anybody. This is the first time we have mentioned this. If you see a cabin in the woods while camping, I can't stop you from staying the night there, but please bring a weapon. We didn't, and that could have turned out a whole lot worse. It was our 10th anniversary, so we decided to go camping, just the two of us, and of course our dog. There is a big national park camping area near where we live, little less than an hour drive, so that was where we were heading. It's basically a big forest with many small lakes, ponds, trails, and camping sites around. Pretty popular place during summer, but we still saw some people, even though it was late September and the weather was cold. We found a good spot next to a lake to set up our camp. It was a beautiful day, so we wanted to hike a bit in the forest. There was a nice long path that was going around the lake where we had our camp, so we chose to go that way. The lake was quite small, and there was another camping site by it. You could see there from our camp, and from there you could see our camp. They were almost on opposite sides of the lake. We walked past the another camp and saw a man there alone, just standing and staring us, not answering when we greeted him. He was maybe in his late 20s, around the same age as us. I thought at that point that he was maybe just shy and a little weird. He had a small tent set up and some other stuff all around the place, so I figured he had been there a while. We just continued walking and didn't think much to it. Eventually we got to our camp and started to set up our tent before it's too dark. We made some food by the fire and just sat there enjoying the peace. Suddenly our dog starts barking like crazy. She was tied to a long wire around a tree. We immediately realized that she wasn't just paranoid and that there really was something in the woods and it was near. It had been very dark for hours at that point. I took the dog to a leash and my husband started to look around with his bright headlamp. Our dog just kept barking. We were confused and sure it was some kind of animal, maybe a bear or a moose, but we couldn't understand why it wasn't scared of us and why it wouldn't run away. My husband went ahead to the path that leads to the another camp. Right when he got to the path, which was just less than 10 meters away from our camp, he saw something on the ground. I told him to go check it out and followed with our dog. He stopped, turned at me and said, "It's a human laying on the ground." The first thing I thought was that maybe they were hurt or dead or something. They just laid there not moving, facing the ground. We asked, "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" And they just suddenly stood up. Turned out it was the guy from the another camp. He was very scared of our dog and told me not to let her near him. I was kind of relieved that it wasn't some creepy-ass bear that was going to eat us, but I soon learned that a bear might have been less scarier than this guy. After he stood up, he walked straight to our campfire and sat down. My husband tried to ask him multiple times why he was sneaking in the dark forest without any light. He didn't give us any answer. We even laughed a bit and told him how we thought he was a damn bear or some shit, but he didn't even smile, just stared at the fire, looking annoyed. His right leg was soaking wet. He probably stepped off the path and dipped it in the lake on his way to our camp. He sat with us for 30 minutes, not talking much. He also clearly wanted to know where our dog was at all times. I saw he had a knife hanging from his belt, but I guess it's not that weird when you're in the woods. Every few minutes he put his hand in his pocket and just peeked of whatever was in there. Kind of like checking the time on your phone without taking it from your pocket, but it wasn't a phone he had there. I felt very uncomfortable and anxious by the whole situation. So when the 30 minutes had passed, he again stood up and mumbled about going back to his own camp and left. He never gave us any explanation of why he came to our camp or why he was stalking us in the dark. He tried very hard not to be seen when we found him. When I thought he was far enough, I told my husband that there's no way I'm sleeping in that tent, the biggest nope ever. Fortunately for me, he agreed and said that the guy might come back when our sleeping. I just wanted to leave ASAP, so my husband started packing things up. Our car was nearby, thank God. And I was guarding and looking around with a light if he comes back. Just when we had almost all of our stuff in the car, I saw a quick flash of light on the path from the guy's camp towards ours. He was coming back. Maybe he thought we went to sleep because he couldn't see our campfire anymore. So yeah, we got in the car and left real quick. I don't know if we overreacted, but I had such a bad feeling about him. Who crawls in the dark, wet forest alone just to stalk some strangers? What would have he done if our dog wouldn't have hurt him? What were his motives? Maybe stab us to death when we're sleeping. I don't know and didn't want to stay there and find out. I'm just glad we had our dog with us. There's a chance she saved our lives. I think people are the scariest thing to find at night when you're camping. A very creepy guy was stalking me and my husband in the dark woods, but our dog saved us. My name is Andrew Thunderbird, 35 years old, and this story is from a year that feels like a lifetime ago. I was born and raised in the small town of Wellesley, Massachusetts. Not much happens here, which is why what I'm about to tell you is even more bizarre. It started innocuously enough. I was fresh out of college, back in my hometown, working a dead-end job at the local hardware store. Not exactly the life I'd envisioned, but hey, it paid the bills. My girlfriend Lacey had just moved in with me. We were both trying to save up for something better, but at least we had each other. One evening, my buddy Owen called. "Bryce, you up for a camping trip this weekend?" Just the guys like old times. Owen always had a knack for pulling me out of my funk. "Sure, why not?" I replied. I figured a weekend in the woods might clear my head. Friday rolled around, and we packed up Owen's beat-up truck with all the essentials: tents, sleeping bags, food, and a decent stash of beer. It was me, Owen, Kyle, and Benny. We headed out to a spot in the Berkshires, a place we'd camped a few times before. It was quiet and far from the hassles of daily life. We got there just before dusk, set up camp, and lit a fire. The night was filled with laughter and stories. It was like we were kids again, with no responsibilities, no worries. Around midnight, I decided to hit the sack. The others were still up, talking and joking. As I crawled into my sleeping bag, I heard I could hear their voices fading into the background, mingling with the sounds of the forest. I woke up to silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. I checked my watch, 3 a.m. I sat up and noticed that Owen, Kyle, and Benny were all fast asleep. I stepped out of the tent to stretch my legs and take a leak. The moon was full, casting an eerie glow over the campsite. As I stood there, I heard a rustling noise in the trees, probably a deer or some other animal, I thought. But then I saw it, a shadowy figure moving among the trees. It was tall, hunched over, and moving with an unsettling grace. My first thought was that it was a bear, but something about its shape was all wrong. I called out, my voice breaking the silence. The figure stopped, turned towards me, and then vanished into the darkness. My heart was racing, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I finished up and went back to the tent, though sleep didn't come easy. The next morning I told the guys about what I'd seen. Owen laughed it off. "You probably had one too many beers. Nothing out here but us and the wildlife." The others agreed, and we went about our day hiking and exploring the area, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, things took a turn for the worse. We were sitting around the fire again, talking about old times, when we heard a blood-curdling scream. It sounded like a woman, but there was something primal about it, something that chilled me to the bone. "What the hell was that?" Kyle asked, his face pale. Benny, always the joker, tried to lighten the mood. "Maybe it's Bigfoot, or worse, Kyle's ex-girlfriend." We laughed nervously, but the tension was palpable. We decided to check it out, grabbing flashlights and heading in the direction of the scream. The woods were dense, and the beams of our flashlights barely penetrated the darkness. After about 10 minutes, we came across a small clearing. In the middle of it was a deer, or what was left of one. It had been torn apart, its insides strewn across the grass. "Oh my God," Benny whispered. What could have done this? Mountain lion, maybe? Owen suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. We heard another rustle in the trees, and all our flashlights swung towards the sound. The figure was back, standing at the edge of the clearing. It was taller than I'd realized, easily 7 feet, with long matted hair and glowing eyes that reflected the light from our flashlights. The creature let out a low guttural sound that made my blood run cold. We didn't stop until we were back at the fire, panting and wide-eyed. "We need to get out of here," I said, trying to catch my breath. "Agreed," Owen said. "Let's pack up and leave, now." We scrambled to gather our things, tossing them haphazardly into the truck. The forest around us seemed to close in, the shadows growing deeper and more oppressive. Just as we were about to get in the truck, Benny screamed. We turned to see the creature standing at the edge of the campsite, its eyes locked onto us. Without thinking, I grabbed the hatchet from my pack and hurled it at the creature. It let out a roar and retreated into the woods. And Owen didn't need to be told twice. We sped down the dirt road, the truck bouncing over the rough terrain. The moonlight flickered through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the windshield. We drove for what felt like hours until we reached a small town. We found a diner that was still open and stumbled inside, disheveled and shaken. The waitress, an older woman with a kind face, looked at us with concern. "You boys look like you've seen a ghost," she said, pouring us coffee. "Something like that," I muttered. We told her a sanitized version of what had happened, just enough to explain why we were so rattled. She listened, nodding occasionally. "You know, there are old legends about these woods," she said. "Stories of creatures that aren't quite human. Most folks dismiss them as just that, stories. But you never know." We spent the rest of the night in a cheap motel, too afraid to sleep. The next morning we drove back to Wellesley in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. We never spoke about that night again, not really. It was like an unspoken pact, a way to keep the fear at bay. Lacey noticed a change in me right away. "Bryce, what happened out there?" she asked one night as we lay in bed. "Nothing," I said, forcing a smile. "Just a weird trip. I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. None of us were. Owen moved to another state a few months later, saying he needed a fresh start. Kyle and Benny drifted away, their laughter and jokes now tinged with an edge of unease. As for me, I stayed in Wellesley, but I never went camping again. I sold my gear, got a new job, and tried to put that night behind me. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that scream, and I wonder what it was that we saw out there in the woods. Life went on, as it does, but the shadows of that night never entirely left me. I married Lacey, and we had 2 kids. I took up woodworking, finding solace in the rhythm of carving and shaping. The routine helped, but the memory lingered. One evening, years later, I was working in my garage when Owen called out of the blue. "Bryce, we need to talk." We met at a bar halfway between our towns, the kind of place where no one asked questions, more worn than I remembered. We ordered beers and sat in silence for a while, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. "I can't stop thinking about it," Owen finally said. "That night. I've tried to move on, but it's always there, like a shadow." I nodded. "Same here. What do you think it was?" Owen took a deep breath. "I don't know, but I've been doing some research. There are stories, old legends about creatures in those woods. They say it's something ancient, something that preys on people who wander too far." I shivered, remembering the creature's eyes. "So what do we do?" Owen shrugged. "I don't think there's anything we can do, just live our lives, I guess." But I had to talk to someone who understands. We stayed there for hours, talking about everything and nothing, trying to make sense of the senseless. It didn't bring closure, but it helped to know I wasn't alone in my fear. As the years passed, the memory of that night faded, but never disappeared. I grew old, watching my children grow up and start families of their own. I told them stories about my youth, but I never mentioned that night in the britches. Then one evening my son Max, now a grown man with a family of his own, came to visit. We sat on the porch, watching the sunset, and he turned to me with a serious expression. "Dad, do you remember that camping trip you went on years ago? The one you never talk about?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Yeah, I remember." Max nodded. "I've been doing some research. There are stories about those woods, stories that go back centuries. People talk about seeing things, hearing screams. I think you saw something real, something that shouldn't be there. I looked at him, my heart heavy with the weight of old fears. Maybe, but there's no point in dwelling on it. We survived, and that's what matters. Max nodded, but I could see the curiosity and determination in his eyes. I just wanted you to know that I believe you, Dad. Whatever it was, you're not alone. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, I felt a sense of peace for the first time in years. Maybe the past would never fully let go, but I had my family, and that was enough. Life is full of mysteries, some better left unexplored. I don't have all the answers, and maybe I never will. But I've learned to live with the shadows, to find light in the moments that matter, and that's enough for me. Back in July of '75, I'd only been a park ranger for a few months at the Yosemite backcountry. Honestly, I still thought of myself more as a glorified camper than an actual ranger. Getting to explore the park and call it work was a dream gig after all. Still, the job was no less important because I was new, which is exactly what I was explaining to a new group of backpackers who had come to my post to get their permits squared away. Don't worry, we're careful with fires, the ringleader, a portly old fellow with a bushy mustache, reassured me. They all looked the experienced type, so I tried to keep the spiel short and sweet. I know you are. Just remember to double-check them before you leave. Fire's no joke. I gave them a friendly reminder. Of course, the bushy mustache guy nodded, looking mildly offended at my implication. I wrapped up with the routine warnings about trash and bear canisters, trying to lighten the mood with a joke about raccoons being even wilder than bears sometimes. They chuckled politely, a couple of the women a little more genuinely than the fellas, then headed off for their trailhead. The group was probably headed to May Lake or somewhere deeper in. Since all the paperwork was in order, I turned back to other duties, mostly tidying up around my station and updating the logbook. The job was full of these quiet moments. There was always work to do, but thankfully nothing too pressing. It was one of the nicer parts of the job, the downtime. The rest of the day passed without incident. A few stragglers stopped to ask directions. 2 separate couples asked about wildlife sightings. And of course, someone wanted to complain about the park's mosquito population. That afternoon, I finished up around sunset and headed back to the tiny ranger's cabin I called home. It was tucked away in a small copse of trees, offering some decent privacy in the otherwise bustling heart of the park. By the time I arrived, night had fallen, casting the whole forest in inky black. The ranger's cabin was just a faint silhouette in the darkness. I was just fishing out my flashlight when a sound snagged my attention. It came from the woods behind the cabin, the rhythmic crack of a branch, followed by a low rustling. I held my breath. It was normal enough to hear small animals out here, squirrels, or maybe even a deer. Maybe I'd spooked something bigger on my walk back. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding a bit thin even to my own ears. Nothing, just silence. I shrugged it off, attributing it to my newbie nerves, and went inside. After cooking up a simple dinner, I sat out on the porch for a while. The sky was a canvas of stars, the summer air heavy with the scent of pine. The next morning, I woke up early, energized to do a patrol of the back trails. I'd been meaning to do the loop out west and 2 alumni meadows for a while. I grabbed a granola bar, packed a lunch, and radioed headquarters about my route. Out there, it was mandatory to check in so they knew where to find you if something went wrong. The first few miles of the trail were uneventful, thankfully. It was a gorgeous day, perfect for hiking. The route was fairly popular, so I crossed paths with a few groups, always stopping for a quick chat and a reminder about the usual fire hazards. It wasn't unusual to encounter the same people at various points along the loop. The park was vast, but so were some hikers' itineraries. I found a nice little rock to sit and enjoy my lunch. It was starting to get pretty hot out, and a touch of shade was a welcome respite. While I was unwrapping my sandwich, I thought I heard a rustling over by the creek. But when I looked, nothing. Just the wind through the trees, probably. Nervy again, damn it. I needed to shake off this rookie anxiety. I ate in peace, tossing the last bits of my crust to a squirrel who was eyeing me with bold curiosity. Getting back on the trail, it was smooth sailing for a good hour, meandering through a thick patch of pines. And then the trail just disappeared. Confused, I backtracked a few paces, looking for signs I might have missed a fork or a detour. Finding nothing, I cursed my inattentiveness. It wasn't the first time this had happened out on patrol. Hikers often made their own makeshift trails that went nowhere. But this one had been so well trodden. Shrugging, I backtracked again, planning to find another path that connected further down the mountain, even if it meant a slightly longer loop. I was walking for a good 20 minutes before I realized something was truly wrong. The forest was growing denser, the trees unfamiliar as they closed in around me. The sun, already lower on the horizon, was barely filtering through the canopy. Yet there was no marked trail. No indication I was heading in the right direction. I was completely lost. Panic started to rise in my chest, that prickly, cold sweat kind of panic I'd only felt a few times in my life. Losing your bearings in the wilderness was serious business, and even with my radio, if the rangers started a search party, these woods were thick enough to make it a long haul. I paused, trying to think logically, which involved trying to calm myself down. I fished out my compass, then cursed aloud as it spun wildly, the magnetic field thrown off by something nearby. No help there. The experienced hiker in me knew you shouldn't wander aimlessly when lost. Better to pick a spot and stay put, conserve your energy, and hope to be found. But something about this felt off. The whole situation was unsettling. This sudden, impossible detour on a clear enough trail. Against my better judgment, I decided to push on, keeping the sun to my right as I continued west. My pace was brisk now, a mix of desperation and the sinking certainty that something wasn't adding up. Then I saw it. A movement just at the edge of my vision. I whipped my head around, heart racing. There was nothing to see, yet this sense that I was being watched was overwhelming. Then I caught it again, a dark shape, moving fast, darting from tree to tree. But whenever I turned to get a good look at it, it was gone. It was too big to be any animal I knew of in this unnatural speed. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to sound brave, but my voice came out a croak. I strained my eyes, searching the shadows between the trunks. Silence. Only the distant creak of branches and my own ragged breaths. The fear was starting to gnaw away at my focus, turning my movements jerky. Every rustle of leaves had me on edge. It was like a game of hide and seek, only I didn't know the rules or what it even was. I pushed on doggedly, trying to outrun my imagination, trying to get back to something familiar. The sun was sinking fast, casting long, strange shadows. My fear intensified with every step. And still, whatever was stalking me stayed in the periphery, unseen yet unnervingly present. A tree directly ahead of me shuddered violently, its leaves cascaded down like rain. For a split second I saw it, a colossal shape, hunched low against the trunk, the bark a mottled texture like old stretched skin. It turned its head and I couldn't make out a face, but I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that it was looking straight at me. My mind went blank with terror. No scream, no movement. Time seemed to freeze as I stared at this thing that could not exist. It was massive, easily twice as tall as I was, its silhouette bulky and contorted. Its limbs were long, too long, ending in twiggy appendages that almost seemed like fingers, but so much longer and thicker. It moved with a chilling fluidity, its joints shifting and bending in ways that made my stomach churn. And then, it launched itself towards me, moving with a speed that defied belief. I barely had time to register its horrifying lunge before I turned and ran. Every instinct in my body screamed to get as far away from this creature as possible. Branches whipped past me, tearing at my skin, and my feet barely seemed to touch the forest floor. Still, I could hear it gaining, its heavy footfalls and rustling breaths growing closer. I was nearing the edge of a clearing, a break in the tree line that opened into a rocky cliff. My heart lurched with hope, even as my legs throbbed in protest, just a little farther. My lungs felt like they were on fire, each ragged breath burning my throat. That damn clearing was so close now, yet it seemed to stretch out endlessly, like a mirage in a desert. I tripped over a root, falling hard, scraping up my palms. The heavy thud of its steps was right behind me. Rolling over, I stared up at the trees, the monster about to crash through the foliage, and silence. Nothing but the echo of my own harsh breaths. I scrambled to my feet, half expecting it to drop from the canopy at any second to lunge out from behind a tree trunk. But still nothing. I turned this way and that, trying to spot it amidst the shadows, the silence somehow more terrifying than its previous pursuit. Unable to think clearly, I stumbled towards the clearing, drawn to the open sky and the relative promise of safety it offered. My body was shaking, adrenaline threatening to turn into full-blown panic. Just as I was about to burst out of the trees, something seized my ankle in an unbreakable grip. I yelped in terror, falling back to the earth, its hand wrapped around my leg, long gnarled fingers digging into my skin with a strength that made me scream in pain. I kicked out with my other leg, fighting frantically. It barely reacted. I was being dragged backward, back toward those monstrous eyes lurking in the darkness. Desperation made me thrash wildly, clawing at the iron grip around my ankle. It didn't move an inch, but I caught a glimpse of my attacker's arm, pale beneath the thick black fur. It moved as it dragged me back into the trees, sinuous and unnatural. Its skin was leathery, almost bark-like, mottled with lichen green patches. Scrabbling for purchase, my hand closed around a fallen branch. Without thinking, I swung it with all my remaining force at the creature's wrist. To my absolute surprise, I heard a crack and a hiss, and the grip immediately loosened. I kicked out again, this time managing to break free. My attacker howled in what was either pain or rage, a sound that made my blood run cold. I didn't look back as I bolted toward the clearing. Bursting into the open, the setting sun blazed in my eyes. I staggered toward the cliffside, the world tilting and spinning as exhaustion finally took its toll. When my vision cleared, I was standing at the precipice, the sharp drop-off and jagged rocks stretching out below. I slumped down, panting heavily, too spent to even process the situation. It seemed I had reached a stalemate. Either it was too afraid of the fall or too injured to approach. But as the light faded, I knew I was trapped. I stayed huddled in a little ball, unable to force myself to do more than watch the sky shift through hues of dusk and finally disappear into deep nightfall. It didn't attack, but I could sense it still out there, hidden in the darkness, a silent, menacing presence. I couldn't sleep, my mind replaying the day's terrifying ordeal. Hours later, when dawn broke, I was delirious with exhaustion and fear. I looked at the cliff edge and a desperate thought occurred to me. I might not survive a direct attack, but maybe with a head start I could risk the drop and scramble down before the creature caught up. I crept cautiously towards the edge, no sign of it, praying that the jagged rocks and fall wouldn't end me before the creature could. Time lost all meaning. I only remember scrambling, rolling, slipping downwards, a blur of cuts, bruises, and overwhelming terror. At some point I lost consciousness, waking up in a pile of leaves at the base of the cliff. I was battered, broken, and bloodied, but alive. The sun was higher now, meaning precious time had been lost. I knew I needed to move. Somehow I pulled myself upright, ignoring the protests of my body. Every step was agony, and twice I nearly fainted, but I kept going. The adrenaline of survival wouldn't let me stop. Eventually, sheer willpower led me to a familiar hiking trail, where I collapsed completely. I woke up much later, not in the forest, but in a hospital bed. Rangers found me, apparently babbling incoherently. My injuries were extensive, but I recovered, physically at least. The Park Service, of course, had questions. At first, I couldn't speak about what happened. Later, when I tried, they chalked it up to shock and a nasty fall. But I know what I saw, and more importantly, I know it's still out there. The creature became a dark legend of the park. A campfire story told to scare new rangers and thrill adventurous hikers. The ones who believe my tale whisper its name, Branch Breaker. It haunts my nightmares, a reminder that the wilderness holds horrors stranger than we can imagine. My name is Matthew Mountain Bear, 27 years old, and this all went down on June 17, 1995. I've been a truck driver most of my adult life, hauling goods across this country from one coast to the other. It's a lonely job, but it pays the bills and gives me time to think. I like to joke that the cab of my truck is my office, my living room, and sometimes my bedroom all rolled into one. I remember that summer day like it was yesterday. I was headed to a small town in Arkansas, delivering a load of construction materials. The route took me through some back roads and lesser-known highways, places you wouldn't go unless you had a reason to be there. I liked those roads, though. They were quiet and the scenery was nice. About halfway through my trip, I pulled into a tiny gas station to fill up. The place looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s, and the old man behind the counter fit right in with the decor. He was friendly enough, and we chatted for a bit about the weather and how the Razorbacks were doing that season. As I was paying, I noticed a bulletin board covered with missing person flyers. Small towns always seem to have more of those, and it made me uneasy. Folks just vanish around here. I asked the old man, nodding towards the board. More often than you think, he replied, his eyes darkening a bit. Best to stick to the main roads and keep to yourself, son. I thanked him for the advice, filled up my thermos with coffee, and got back on the road. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the fields and trees. I flipped on the radio and found some old rock station, cranking it up to keep myself awake. A couple of hours later, my eyelids were getting heavy, and I figured it was time to pull over for a nap. I found a little pull-off area just past a dense patch of forest. It wasn't an official rest stop, but it looked good enough. I parked the truck, locked the doors, and climbed into the sleeper cab. It didn't take long for me to doze off. I woke up to a sound that was out of place. At first I thought it was just an animal rustling around outside, but then I heard it again. It was a thump, followed by a dragging noise. I sat up, my heart pounding, and listened. There it was again, thump dragged. It was coming from the back of the truck. I grabbed a flashlight and my tire iron, telling myself it was probably nothing. Maybe a branch had fallen or some critter was trying to get into the cargo. I unlocked the door and stepped out into the cool night air. The moon was full, giving me just enough light to see by without the flashlight. I walked around to the back of the truck, my grip tight on the tire iron. As I got closer, I could hear something moving inside the trailer. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I unlocked the latch and slowly lifted the door. The smell hit me first. It was the sickly sweet stench of decay. I gagged, stepping back and shining the flashlight inside. There, among the neatly stacked pallets of construction materials, was a body. A woman, from what I could tell, though she was so badly decomposed it was hard to be sure. She was wrapped in plastic, like some kind of macabre gift. Panic surged through me and I dropped the flashlight. It clattered to the ground, casting wild shadows as it rolled. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. Who was she? How did she get in my truck? And more importantly, who put her there? I scrambled back into the cab, locking the doors behind me. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the keys in the ignition. I started the engine and tore out of there, not caring about speed limits or potholes. My mind was a blur of fear and confusion. I needed to find a phone and call the cops, but I had no idea where the nearest town was. After what felt like hours of driving, I saw the glow of lights up ahead. It was a diner, one of those 24-hour places that cater to truckers and night owls. I pulled into the parking lot, my tires screeching. I ran inside, my eyes darting around wildly. The waitress behind the counter looked up, startled. She asked, her voice tinged with concern. "I need to use your phone," I panted. "It's an emergency." She pointed to a payphone on the wall, and I fumbled for change, finally managing to dial 911. My heart pounded as I explained what I'd found, stumbling over my words in my haste. The operator's voice was calm and steady. "Stay where you are, sir. We're sending someone out to you right now. Do not leave the location." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me, and hung up. The waitress came over with a cup of coffee. "On the house," she said softly. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I took the coffee, my hand still shaking, and sat down at a booth. The place was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter, and an old man nursing a bowl of soup in the corner. The minutes stretched unlike hours as I waited for the cops to arrive. When they finally did, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. 2 officers walked in, looking around before spotting me. I stood up and waved them over. "You're the one who called?" one of them asked, a tall guy with a stern face. "Yeah, that's me," I replied. "Ezra Tate. My truck's up front." They followed me outside, and I led them to the back of the truck. The smell hit us again as I lifted the door, and the officers exchanged a grim look. They called for backup and started asking me questions. Where I'd been, if I'd seen anyone around, if I had any idea who the woman was. I answered as best I could, but I was just as clueless as they were. While we waited for the detectives to arrive, I sat on the curb staring at the asphalt. The other officer, a younger guy, staved with me, trying to keep me calm. "These things happen," he said, though it didn't feel very reassuring. The detectives showed up a little while later and started processing the scene. They took my statement again, this time in more detail. I told them about the gas station and the old man's warning. One of the detectives, a woman with sharp eyes, asked if I remembered anything unusual about the people I had seen there. "Not really," I said. "It was just the old man and a couple of other drivers. Nothing seemed off." She nodded and made a note in her book. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Tate. You're free to go for now, but don't leave town." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. I got back in my truck and drove to the nearest motel, where I finally collapsed into bed. Sleep didn't come easy, and when it did, it was filled with nightmares. The next morning I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a truck myself. I checked out and went to a diner across the street for breakfast. I was halfway through my eggs when the detective from last night walked in. She spotted me and came over. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. I shook my head and she sat down across from me. "We identified the woman," she said, getting straight to the point. "Her name was Linda Pierce. She'd been missing for about a month. Last seen in Little Rock." I felt a chill run down my spine. "How did she end up in my truck?" I asked. "That's what we're trying to figure out," she said. "We think she was dead before she was put there. The plastic wrapping suggests whoever did it wanted to keep the smell contained for as long as possible." "Jesus," I muttered, pushing my plate away. "Do you think it was one of the other drivers? Someone at that gas station?" "It's possible," she said. "We're looking into it. In the meantime, I'd suggest you be careful. Whoever did this might not be done." Her words stayed with me long after she left. I finished my coffee and paid the bill, then headed back to my truck. I had deliveries to make, and I couldn't afford to sit around waiting for answers. As I drove, I kept an eye on the road, checking my mirrors more often than usual. Every car that passed made me tense up, wondering if it was the killer. Over the next few days, the fear started to fade, replaced by a sense of determination. I wasn't going to let some psycho scare me off the road. I kept driving, kept doing my job, but I was more vigilant. I checked my truck thoroughly every time I stopped, making sure no one had tampered with it. A week later, I got a call from the detective. They'd found the guy, a drifter who'd been hanging around truck stops and rest areas. He had a record for assault and had been spotted in Little Rock around the time Lindell went missing. They caught him trying to hitch a ride out of state. I felt a wave of relief, but it was mixed with anger. I wanted to know why he'd done it, why he'd chosen my truck, but I knew I'd probably never get those answers. The detective told me to stay in touch and let her know if I remembered anything else, but for now the case was closed. Life went back to normal, or as normal as it could be. I kept driving, kept hauling goods across the country, but that experience changed me. I was more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. I still loved the open road, but the shadows seemed a little darker, the quiet nights a little more unsettling. Every now and then, I'd think about Linda Pierce and wonder what her life had been like, who she'd been. I never found out much more about her, just that she was another victim in a long list of people who'd met a tragic end. But I kept going. Because that's what you do. You keep moving forward no matter what. And so I'm still out here driving my routes, doing my job. The road is my home, and I've learned to live with the ghosts that ride along with me. It's not always easy, but it's the life I know, and it's the life I've chosen. Bram Park Ranger at Calaveras Big Trees State Park in California. Been doing this job for almost 10 years now. And man, don't let people fool you. The woods aren't always sunshine and bird songs. I've seen weird stuff out here. Stuff that could turn a man into one of those crazy wilderness hermits you hear about on podcasts. Today's shift started like any other, at least until I checked in with Bass on the radio. You wouldn't think that simple act could be scary, would you? But the dispatcher, old man Gibson, I don't even know his first name after all this time, sounded off. Bram, copy. His voice was all scratchy static, like he was whispering. That should have been my first red flag, but the routine of the job kind of dulled my senses. Yep, Gibson, I copy. What you got for me? Even tried for a bit of lightheartedness to see if he'd perk up. Visitors, they... Gibson cuts out, more static, crackling through. Now I'm on edge. Visitors this far out into the park are rare, even in season. Gibson, you cutting out on me? Say again? Then it's just silence on the other end. Okay, definitely weird. I try a few more calls, nothing. I figure it's probably a busted antenna. Calaveras ain't exactly known for top-notch cell service, let alone radio towers. Still, can't shake the unease crawling up my spine. I finish logging my route and head out, old Jeep rattling along the trail. Sun's already hot overhead, even though it's barely mid-morning. The trees, those massive sequoias that are my usual cathedral, they feel heavier, more oppressive today. My gut instinct is to turn back. But there's that damn ranger responsibility kicking in. What if someone really needs help? So I grit my teeth and press on. First hour on patrol, nothing. No visitors, just the usual. A woodpecker hammering a dead log, a deer peeking out from the deep shadows. Yet that sense of being watched, man, it's getting stronger. I'm starting to half joke to myself that Bigfoot's finally decided to make an appearance. Dumb humor, I know, but it helps cut the tension a little. That's when it happens. I'm rounding a bend, and there across the trail is a figure. I slam the brakes so hard I nearly pitch forward into the windshield. Just stands there, dead still, doesn't even flinch at the screech of tires. And you know, at first I don't register how wrong it is. It's just a person in a kind of strange old-fashioned clothes, but nothing too alarming, until I realize how tall it is, way too tall. I ain't short, but it's got to be pushing 7 feet, easy, and lanky. Limbs like it was stretched out on a rack. Its head, God, its head. No face, I mean nothing. No eyes, nose, mouth, just smooth skin stretched tight across its skull. It's like looking at a freaky mannequin with way too many joints. The skin, it ain't pale either, kind of mottled brown in the dappled sunlight, like old tree bark. Now this should have been the point where I bolted in reverse, right? Well, part of me was screaming to get the hell out of there, but this job, it kind of drills some stupid stubbornness into you. I'm thinking, maybe some lost hiker ain't all there mentally, needs assistance. It's a leap, I know, but it was the only thing keeping me from total panic. So I grabbed the mic from the dash, fingers shaking a bit. Gibson, come in. I got a visual on a possible lost or injured person. Over. Dead air. Not even static this time. That rational part of my brain, the voice yelling about hikers, it's starting to shrivel up. My next move, even I can't defend it in hindsight. I figure getting a closer look might, clear things up. I roll down the window and the whole forest suddenly seems too damn quiet. No birds, no insects, like everything alive just held its breath. Hello, sir, ma'am? Are you in need of assistance? My voice cracks on the last word. The figure doesn't move, doesn't even seem to acknowledge I've spoken, just stands there, unnervingly still. That's when the smell hits me, rotting meat mixed with this sickly sweet undertone like sap gone sour. My stomach heaves, that flight response finally surging up full blast. I fumble the Jeep into reverse, ready to haul ass back the way I came, but I'm too late. Thing moves, not walking, not in a way humans understand. It's more like its parts kind of disassemble and reform further down the trail, all without a sound. Think of one of those stop-motion videos where the objects kind of warp in and out of place. Jesus, just remembering it sends shivers down my spine. The road ahead blocked. The thing, or whatever the hell it is, just manifested there out of nowhere. Okay, now panic is officially in the driver's seat. I throw the Jeep into park, the smell so strong I'm gagging. I got a pistol in the glove box, but would it even work on something this unnatural? I'm fumbling for the damn thing when I hear a new sound, clicking, multiple clicks all around coming from the trees. I look up and my blood runs cold. There's more. At least a dozen of those things, perched in the branches like grotesque birds, their blank heads tilting in unison as they observe me trapped in my Jeep. My hands shaking so hard I barely get the pistol out. It feels stupid. a pea shooter against whatever the hell this is. But it's all I have, so I load around and flick off the safety. These things, they move in that freaky, non-human way, closer now. I can make out details. Fingers like twigs, long and gnarled. Each step they take cracks dead branches underfoot, sends a ripple of sound echoing through the trees. That smell, it gets stronger the closer they get. I try to blank out my mind, focus only on aiming, on surviving this. My first shot. It goes wide, the pistol kicking hard in my hand. I swear one of those things tilts its head like it's amused. That's when I notice the change. It's shifting, not just rotting meat anymore. There's a sharp metallic tang to it. Blood. I see it then, a flash of white moving through the trees. Not just a deer, though, too large. The antlers all wrong. Twisted branches instead of smooth bone. It's charging, straight towards one of those things. Whatever it is, it hates them as much as I do right now, so maybe, just maybe, there's a chance. I start firing, not caring about aim anymore, just noise, distraction. It works. The attention of those branch-like figures shifts towards the creature away from me. The monstrous deer, for lack of a better word, barrels into the clearing. Its hooves are like hammers slamming into dead wood. Its antlers snag one of the things, lifting it. Now I'm not gonna lie. What follows is pure bloody chaos. It's a blur of thrashing limbs, piercing shrieks that sound nothing like any animal I know. There's something beautiful, primal about the way that deer thing fights. It's nature's fury unleashed, raw and undiluted. While I fight with bullets, it fights with tooth and horn and pure, terrifying strength. For one heart-pounding moment, I think it might actually win. There are more of those things than I first thought. Their tall forms emerging from the shadows, the deer thing. It fights like 10 animals, twisting and kicking, each movement taking down one of its attackers. I take the chance and run, sprint back to the Jeep, fumbling with the keys, engine roaring to life. I slam it into reverse and don't stop. I drive blind, branches tearing at my clothes, the world blurring with tears and adrenaline. Somehow I find the main trail and don't stop until I'm back at the ranger station. I stumble in, babbling some crazy story about an animal attack, something about trespassers. I don't know how believable I am, but I think the sheer look in my eyes says enough. They call the cops, get a search party going, the whole deal. They never found anything, of course, no dead bodies, no trace of those things. But I found something. Days later, wandering the woods again on shaky legs, I found it. A clearing torn to hell and back. Splinters of what looked like wood mixed with something else, dark, sticky, smelling of iron and decay. And there in the churned-up earth, a single perfect antler, bone white, with twists and branches like nothing on God's green earth. In the quiet of my cabin, in those sleepless nights that followed, I thought a lot about names for the things I saw. Finally one stuck, the dryads, because of the way they moved, the tree-like skin. And because in old stories, dryads were protectors of the forest, weren't they? Maybe these things were something like that, twisted, corrupted, but fighting to protect their home, their way. Or maybe they were just monsters, driven by hunger or cruelty I can't fathom. The deer creature? Well, I like to think it's still out there. The Leshy, some old Slavic folklore calls it, guardian of the wild places. They never found a sign of Gibson, by the way. Radio tower worked perfectly fine once they checked. As for me, I quit my job not long after. Can't handle the quiet of woods anymore, but the Leshy and the dryads. I can't help but wonder if I was the first or if there's others out there still fighting the unseen battles all around us. My name is Christopher Stormrider, 42 years old, and this is a story about a time when things went very wrong for me and a few others. It was in 2008 in a small, almost forgotten town in Wyoming called Encampment. I was working as a mechanic at the time, which suited me just fine. I liked working with my hands, fixing things, getting dirty, and there wasn't much that I couldn't fix. Encampment isn't the kind of place you'd find on a map unless you were looking for it. It's quiet, surrounded by mountains, and has a population of just under 500 people. People there know each other, for better or worse. For me, it was mostly for the better. I lived alone, didn't have many friends, but I got along well with my neighbor Tom, who ran the local diner. We'd often spend our evenings talking about nothing in particular over a couple of beers. One evening, Tom told me about a series of disappearances that had been happening in the surrounding forests. Now Wyoming has its share of missing hikers and hunters, but this was different. People who lived in the town their whole lives, who knew the land like the back of their hand, were vanishing without a trace. Was one of them. Tom had a wild theory that something was hunting people. I laughed it off, said he was spending too much time watching those ghost hunting shows. Life carried on as usual until one evening when I was at Tom's diner. It was late. The place was empty except for us. We were watching some old western on the TV when suddenly the lights flickered. Tom and I exchanged a glance, shrugged it off, and continued watching. The flickering stopped, and we forgot about it until Tom went to close up and found the back door wide open. He swore he had locked it. Maybe it was the wind, I said, but we both knew better. That door had a heavy latch. No wind was going to open it. Tom decided to stay over at my place that night. We didn't talk about it, but I knew he was spooked. I didn't mind the company. The next day, news came that another person had gone missing. This time it was Edna, an elderly lady who lived alone on the outskirts of town. Her place was found empty, door wide open, a pot of stew still simmering on the stove. No signs of struggle, no footprints, nothing. It was like she had just walked out and disappeared into thin air. I started paying more attention to the stories Tom was telling me. We were both on edge. People in town were whispering, making up their own theories. Some said it was a wild animal. Others talked about ghosts. A few even suggested there was a killer among us. One night I couldn't sleep. It was around midnight and I decided to take a walk. It was cold, the kind of cold that bites through your jacket. As I walked past Edna's house, I saw something move in the shadows. I froze, squinting to see better, but there was nothing. I shook it off as my imagination turned around and went back home. A few days later, I had a late-night visitor. Tom banged on my door, pale and shaking. He said he had seen something in the woods behind his diner. I grabbed my shotgun. It wasn't loaded, but it made us feel better, and we headed out. We didn't see anything that night, but we both felt like we were being watched. The disappearances continued, and the town was in a panic. People were locking their doors, kids weren't allowed to play outside, and anyone who could leave did. Those of us who stayed were left with a sense of dread. One evening I was working late at the garage when I heard a noise outside. It sounded like a faint cry for help. I grabbed my flashlight and went to investigate. The sound was coming from the woods. Against my better judgment, I ventured in. I kept walking, calling out, but the cry stopped. Suddenly there was silence. I turned to head back when I saw it. A figure tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. It moved fast, too fast for me to react. I stumbled back, falling over a log. By the time I got up, it was gone. I ran back to the garage, locked the doors, and called Tom. He came over and we spent the night trying to make sense of what I saw. We both agreed it was something not natural, but what it was, we couldn't say. The next day, Sheriff Arnold came by. He was a tough guy, not easily rattled, but even he looked worried. He asked us to keep quiet about what we saw, said it would only cause more panic. He told us he was forming a search party to look for the missing people and asked if we'd join. We agreed. It wasn't like we had much of a choice. The search party consisted of me, Tom, Sheriff Arnold, and a few other townsfolk. We combed the woods for days, finding nothing but more questions. One of the guys, Bill, swore he saw something similar to what I described, but no one else did. Then, one night, it happened. We were camping out in the woods, taking turns keeping watch. It was my shift when I heard rustling in the bushes. I pointed my flashlight and saw it again, those glowing eyes. Before I could react, it charged at us. The camp erupted into chaos. People were shouting, firing their guns blindly into the dark. I managed to get a clear shot, but it didn't seem to do any good. The thing was fast, too fast. By the time the chaos died down, Bill was gone. We searched for him until dawn, but found no trace. Sheriff Arnold decided it was too dangerous to continue and called off the search. We headed back to town, defeated. Back in encampment, things got worse. More people went missing, and those who remained were too scared to leave their homes. Tom and I decided to take matters into our own hands. We armed ourselves with whatever we could find and set out to hunt the thing. We spent days tracking it, following the faintest of trails. Finally, we found its lair, a cave deep in the woods. We could smell it before we saw it, a false stench of decay. We entered cautiously, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The cave was littered with bones, some animal, some unmistakably human. Then we saw it. The thing was hunched over, gnawing on something. It looked up, eyes glowing, and let out a noise that sent chills down my spine. It charged at us. Tom fired first, hitting it in the shoulder. I followed, aiming for its head. It staggered but didn't go down, knocking Tom to the ground. I fired again, emptying my gun into it until it finally collapsed. We stood there, panting, staring at the lifeless body. It looked human but twisted, deformed. We dragged it out of the cave and burned it, not knowing what else to do. The disappearances stopped after that. Life and encampments slowly returned to normal, but the town was never quite the same. People who left never came back, and those who stayed never spoke about what happened. Tom and I kept our secret, telling ourselves it was for the best. We never talked about that night, but every now and then I catch him looking at the woods with a haunted look in his eyes. We survived, but we weren't the same. I still work at the garage, fixing cars, living my life. But every time I hear a noise in the woods, I wonder if there's something else out there, waiting. So that's my story. It's not a happy one, but it's the truth. I guess some things are better left buried in the past, forgotten like the town of encampment. But sometimes, late at night, I can still see those glowing eyes and wonder if we really killed it, or just made it angry. Summer I was 24. I snagged a gig as a ranger in Red Lodge State Park out in Minnesota. A small-timer from New York, I figured the quiet woods would be a nice change of pace. Plus, my buddy Vance had done the same thing a few years back, and he said the scenery wasn't half bad. He also said the job was a whole lot of nothing, which sounded even better coming from him. I was assigned the South Stretch, a good 30 miles of trails, picnic areas, the whole deal. I'm not gonna lie, during my first few weeks Vance had it spot on. I spent most of my days driving around, tidying up campsites and waving at the occasional hiker. It was so peaceful, almost dull. Maybe that's why when things went sideways, it took me by complete surprise. It started with some missing person reports. Nothing unusual, folks wander off all the time. Still, protocol is protocol. So I made my rounds, chatting up campers about any strangers they might have seen. That's how I met Eleanor, a spry old gal with an Airstream and a suspicious demeanor. We got to talking and she mentioned hearing strange noises at night. Not an animal, I know them calls, she'd said, squinting up those trails. Something bigger. Honestly, I chalked it up to her imagination, but I made a note to be more watchful around those parts of the park. A few days later, the radio crackles to life. It's HQ. Another hiker's vanished. They want me to do a sweep, focus on the south end where Eleanor had mentioned the sounds. Suddenly, that dullness doesn't feel so comforting anymore. I roll up to the designated starting point, radio at my hip, and set out on foot. The sun's starting to dip, making the woods look all shadowy and unsettling. I keep expecting to find a lost kid or a grumpy retiree, but all the trails turn up empty. Eleanor's noises play in my head, making every rustle of leaves sound monstrous. Man, Vance never mentioned being this easy to spook. The further in I get, the colder it feels, and not just cause the lights fading. It's like the air itself sits heavier here. Then I see it. A flash of movement deeper in the trees. "Hello, anyone there?" I call out. No one answers. My heart drums a rhythm on my ribs. I don't like the looks of this. I unclip the radio. "HQ, this is Ranger Callahan. Possible sign of the missing hiker." Before I can finish my report, the thing steps out into the dusky light. Lord, I wish I could unsee it. It's tall, at least 7 feet, with wiry limbs that look too long, all twisted. Its head, that's the worst, bulbous. Skin pulled tight like something rotting neath. No eyes, only slits for a nose and a gash of a mouth that hangs wide open. It lets out a screech that pierces my ears, a sound I can't even describe. Fear shoots white-hot through my veins. Whatever this is, it ain't natural. I fumble for my sidearm, fingers trembling as I line up a shot. HQ, shots fired at. The creature lunges, and it's fast, inhumanly fast. The gun flies out of my hand as I hit the ground, rolling to avoid a swipe of its impossibly long claws. My heart hammers like it's about to leap out of my chest. I scramble back, trying to put space between us, the forest blurring around me. I need to radio for help. But where's the damn thing? I whip my head around, searching the trees frantically. It could be anywhere, and there, slinking across the branches like a warped spider. It screeches again, a sound that cuts right through me and leaps. Time slows. My mouth opens to scream, but all that comes out is a choked gasp as the weight of the creature crashes into my chest. My arm slams into a tree trunk hard enough to make my teeth rattle. It's a half-blind stumble from there, the adrenaline masking the flare of pain in my shoulder. I can hear that awful screech echoing behind me, getting closer. Branches whip at my face as I run, tearing at my clothes, my skin. Doesn't matter. Pain's temporary. Getting eaten ain't. Lungs screaming, I burst out into a clearing and skid to a halt. There's an old fire tower in the center, rusty and skeletal, but it's high. If I can climb it, maybe I can get a signal on the radio, call for backup. It's my only shot. I sprint towards it, the metal ladder rungs cold beneath my battered hands. Scrambling up feels slow, clumsy, with terror clawing in my throat. Don't look down, I chanted in my head. But I do. The creature's below, circling the base of the tower, those spindly limbs twitching as it regards me with that empty-eyed stare. Nearly at the top, I risk another glance. Through the trees, I can see my patrol truck. Just a little speck, the radio, if I could just get to it. I'm almost there, my fingers desperately grasping the last rung when the tower gives a sickening lurch. One of the rusted support beams groans, then snaps with a horrible metallic shriek. The whole thing tilts, slow at first, and then with terrifying speed. My scream gets cut short as the ground rushes up toward me. Pain explodes in my leg, and blackness swallows me whole. I wake up in the hospital, groggy and confused. A nurse tells me some hikers stumbled across me, unconscious but lucky to be alive. Broken leg, mild concussion, a hell of a story, she says. But when I try to explain what happened, the words stick in my throat. It sounds too wild even to me. The other park rangers give me sympathetic looks, say I must have been in shock. Maybe they're right. That part's sadly unsurprising. But what I saw out there, I've worked forests my whole life, seen all manner of critters. That thing wasn't any bear or bobcat I've ever heard of. Eleanor, bless her nosy soul, comes to visit, brings me a pie and a whole lot of "I told you so" energy. Turns out she had a run-in with the creature too, right around the time she'd reported those noises. It snatched one of her chickens and vanished back into the trees. We never saw it again. The reports of missing folks stopped too. Whatever it was, seems it moved on or found its fill. The park never officially reopened that trail. Unsafe conditions, the signs say, fine by me. Vance called when he heard what happened, joked about me finally getting some excitement. I didn't find it so funny. They offered my old job back, of course, said they needed experienced people after the whole incident. I turned it down, told them I'd taken a shine to the quiet indoors. They looked at me like I was nuts considering. Sometimes late at night I still think I hear that screech, high and wrong, like a nail dragged across glass. The doctors blamed it on tinnitus, some nerve damage from the fall. Maybe they're right. But I started calling it the rakeback because of the way it looked all twisted and hunched. It seems as good a name as any for a monster you can't prove exists. My name is Joshua Oakleaf, 39 years old, and this happened to me on June 5, 2019. I've been a park ranger for over 15 years, mostly stationed in the quiet and serene backcountry of the San Juan National Forest in Colorado. It's a peaceful job for the most part, involving plenty of time spent hiking, maintaining trails, and educating visitors about the beauty and hazards of the wilderness. But one day my ordinary routine took a turn that still haunts me. My life outside of work is pretty simple. I live in a small cabin just outside the forest boundary with my dog Jack. I enjoy fishing, woodworking, and the occasional beer with my buddies. The job suits me because it allows me to be close to nature, which has always been my solace. But I never imagined nature could turn so dark. The day started like any other. I was scheduled for a routine patrol of the southern sector. an area known for its dense woods and relatively few visitors. I packed my usual gear, a map, compass, radio, and a trusty old revolver that I rarely had reason to use. The forest felt especially still that day, a little too quiet. But I shrugged it off as my imagination. I started my patrol around 8 a.m., moving through familiar trails, checking campsites, and ensuring everything was in order. About an hour into my hike, I met a group of campers, a couple in their mid-30s, Dax and Lena Haverford. They were friendly, new to the area, and eager for some recommendations on less crowded spots. We chatted for a bit, and I suggested a few trails. As we parted ways, I joked, "Just don't get lost out there, folks. This place can be a maze if you're not careful." Continuing my patrol, I noticed something strange about midday. I came across a campsite that seemed abandoned, but not in the usual way. The tent was torn, gear was scattered, and there was a faint smell of smoke. It looked like whoever had been there left in a hurry. I radioed back to the ranger station to report the find. My colleague Troy responded that he hadn't heard of any missing persons in the area, but he'd keep the line open just in case. The sun was high when I decided to investigate further. I followed the faint trail leading away from the campsite, thinking I might find whoever had left in such a rush. About half a mile in, I found a backpack snagged on a tree branch, torn and empty. That's when I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a scream, distant but unmistakable. Someone was in trouble. I picked up my pace, moving toward the direction of the scream. The forest grew thicker, the trees seeming to close in around me. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled into a small clearing. There, lying on the ground, was a man in his late 20s, badly injured and barely conscious. His name was Ian Goodwin, one of the campers registered in the area. He had deep gashes across his chest and arms, as if he'd been attacked by a wild animal. I knelt beside him, trying to keep my voice calm. "Ian, what happened? Who did this to you?" His eyes fluttered open, fear and confusion mixing in his gaze. He muttered something incoherent before passing out. I had to act fast. I radioed for immediate medical assistance, giving them my coordinates. As I waited for the rescue team, I felt an eerie sensation, like I was being watched. I scanned the tree line, but saw nothing. When the medics arrived and took Ian away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I decided to head back to the station, but not before leaving markers along the trail to remember exactly where I found Ian. Back at the ranger station, I briefed Troy on what happened. We pulled out a detailed map of the area, marking the abandoned campsite and the spot where I found Ian. Something about the locations felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on it. We agreed to keep an eye out and report any unusual activity immediately. Days passed and Ian remained in critical condition, unable to provide any information about what attacked him. Then another camper went missing, a young woman named Sophie Morales. Her friends reported that she'd gone for a hike alone and never returned. This was getting serious. Troy and I organized a search party. We combed through the forest, calling her name, looking for any sign of her. Hours turned into a long, frustrating day with no results. As night fell, we decided to head back and regroup in the morning. On the way back, I found a piece of Sophie's jacket snagged on a bush, torn just like Ian's backpack. My gut twisted with dread. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying the events over and over. Something about this wasn't adding up. It wasn't a wild animal. The attacks were too calculated, too vicious. My mind wandered to old stories and legends I'd heard over the years. But I dismissed them. This was real, and there had to be a rational explanation. The next day, I returned to the spot where I found Ian. The forest felt different, heavier somehow. I followed the markers I'd left, scanning the area for any clues I might have missed. Then I saw it, a set of tracks, almost human but larger and deeper. They led further into the forest, toward a part one rarely ventured into. I followed the tracks cautiously, my hand hovering over my revolver. The trail led me to a cave partially hidden by overgrown foliage. The entrance was wide enough for a person to walk through, but dark and foreboding. I hesitated, but then I thought of Sophie and Ian. I couldn't turn back now. Inside the cave, the air was cool and damp. I switched on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. The cave was deeper than I expected, twisting and turning like a labyrinth. As I moved further in, I found more evidence: torn clothing, a broken flashlight, and blood. Lots of blood. My heart pounded as I pressed on. Then I heard it, a low, guttural noise, almost like breathing. And there it was, a creature unlike anything I'd ever seen. It stood on two legs, towering over me with matted fur and glowing eyes. Its face was a grotesque mix of human and animal features, and its claws were stained with blood. For a moment I was frozen with fear. Then it charged. I fired my revolver, the shots echoing through the cave. The bullet seemed to slow it down, but it kept coming. I backed up, firing until I was out of ammo. Desperation kicked in, and I grabbed a large rock, hurling it at the creature. It struck its head and the creature stumbled, giving me just enough time to run. I sprinted out of the cave, not daring to look back. Once outside, I radioed Troy, my breath ragged and hard racing. "Troy, we've got a serious problem. Get everyone out here now. I found what's been attacking people, and it's not human." We gathered a larger team, armed and ready. When we returned to the cave, the creature was gone, but the evidence remained: blood, torn clothes, and the marks of a struggle. We searched the area thoroughly, but found no trace of it. It was as if it had vanished. Ian never regained consciousness and passed away a week later. Sophie was never found, and her disappearance remained a mystery. The forest felt tainted, the sense of peace and safety shattered. I continued my job, but I was always on edge, always looking over my shoulder. Rumors spread about what had happened, but I kept the details to myself. The official report mentioned a wild animal attack, but I knew better. The creature was still out there, somewhere, waiting. Years have passed since that day, but I've never forgotten. Every time I step into the forest, I'm reminded of the darkness that lurks within its depths. I'd become more cautious, more vigilant, and every once in a while, I hear a sound in the distance, a reminder that some things are better left unexplored. So if you ever find yourself wandering through the San Juan National Forest, remember to stay on the trails and never, ever go into the cave. You might not come back. I've worked on the Yellowstone backcountry trails for years, long enough to know all those whispered stories about rangers vanishing or just old wives' tales. You get lost, sure. An elk gets a little too close, you twist an ankle. Yeah, I get it. But the woods don't swallow folks whole, not out here. Today, though, as I patrol a section of the northern range, I'm starting to wonder if I underestimated this place. Something about this early summer afternoon feels off, like I'm being watched. Makes sense to a degree. This is grizzly territory, and they're fiercely protective of their cubs around this time of year. Still, this is different. It's more of a prickly feeling under my skin, the kind you get when someone's eyes are fixed on your back. I try to shrug it off, gotta focus on the task at hand. This overgrown path hasn't seen maintenance in ages, and there's a trip report claiming a hazardously tilted bridge near the 2-mile mark. I'm nearing that spot now, pushing my way through thick brush. Suddenly I hear it, a low growl so deep it practically thrums my chest. My eyes scan for movement, but whatever made the sound stays hidden. Another growl, louder this time, closer. No denying it. I'm being stalked. I draw my radio. Ranger Elroy requesting backup. Possible predator encounter near. Static cuts me off. Damn it, the signal's always spotty out here. I try again, but it's no use. I'm alone. Then it hits me. What if this thing, whatever it is messing with my radio signal on purpose? The thought's ridiculous, except something ripped a whole chunk out of a communications tower further down the range last year. Nobody ever figured out what could have done that. Suddenly, the dense foliage in front of me practically explodes, and I recoil in horror. It's massive, easily 8 feet tall, bipedal, but loping on all fours like an overgrown ape. Its body is thick with shaggy hair, the color of dried blood, and its arms drag on the ground, ending in vicious-looking claws. The head, gods, the head is the worst part. It's misshapen. The snout elongated into something almost wolfish. Pale, bulbous eyes stare out from under a heavy brow, a predatory hunger shining in their depths. I freeze. My training tells me to stand my ground, raise my arms, make noise. But this creature doesn't feel like any bear I've ever known. There's an unnatural intelligence in its gaze, something calculating. My gun rests holstered on my hip, but before I can even think to reach for it, the thing lurches towards me. Now I'm running, scrambling through the trees, ignoring the branches tearing at my arms. The beast thrashes behind me, surprisingly quick for its bulk. It bellows, an unearthly sound that chills my blood. I stumble, hitting the ground hard. My world tilts painfully as I realize my ankle is twisted, maybe even broken. I scramble up, but I'm too slow. It's on me in a flash, its foul breath washing over me, its rank claws digging into my shoulder, then a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. Two shapes, pale-faced and lithe, explode from the undergrowth, shrieking wildly. The creature seems startled for a moment. My attackers, whatever they are, waste no time in capitalizing. They move in a blur, flanking the beast and striking it with crude stone weapons. It roars, its focus shifting from me as it tries to fight them off. My heart thunders in my chest. I have a chance. I struggle to my feet, limping away as fast as I can. The battle rages behind me, a cacophony of enraged bellows and those unsettling high-pitched cries. I dare a glance over my shoulder. One of my rescuers lies splayed on the ground, motionless. The other one continues to fight, desperately harrying the creature, driving it deeper into the trees. I keep moving, forcing myself forward despite the pain. I have to get out of here, have to radio for help. Whatever those things were, they bought me enough time. But for how long? The thought of that hulking monstrosity tearing through the forest, still on my scent, sends a fresh surge of terror through me. I don't know if I'll make it. My lungs burn, every breath a ragged gasp as I stumble through the trees. The relentless crashing behind me tells me my pursuer hasn't given up the chase yet. I can't outpace it. That much is clear, but maybe, just maybe, I can outsmart it. I spot a narrow ravine up ahead. Risky, but it could be my only chance. I veer towards it, my broken ankle sending sharp stabs of pain up my leg, and hurl myself down the steep incline. Mud and loose rocks slide beneath me, but I don't dare slow down. At the bottom, creek cuts through the ravine, surprisingly deep and swift given the time of year. Desperate, I plunge in. The icy water shocks my system, momentarily numbing the pain. I force myself to swim against the current, the creature's roars echoing above me. Is it still on the bank, confused, or did it follow me down? I reach a bend in the ravine, offering a sliver of concealment. I drag myself onto a narrow outcropping, barely large enough to hold my weight, and try to catch my breath. My pursuer bursts into view, scrambling along the top of the ravine. Its beady eyes search frantically, finally locking on me. It lopes back and forth along the bank, growling in frustration. Below me, the current rages. My only escape route is also a potential death trap. But staying means becoming its next meal. A wild gamble, but my best, maybe even only chance. With a gasp, I push myself off the rock, surrendering to the current. The shock of icy water slams into me, the force of it threatening to rip me under. I fight to keep my head above the surface, gasping, choking, the world reduced to the roar of the water and the dull pounding of my heart. Then, abruptly, I'm flung into a shallow pool where the waters briefly calm. I cough and scramble upright, only to lose my footing again. The current drags me mercilessly onwards. Up ahead, the sound changes, a deafening rumble that makes the hairs on my neck stand on end. A waterfall. My stomach twists in terror. I'm going over. There's nothing I can do to stop it. The roar intensifies as I plunge into icy darkness, my body tumbling and thrashing against unseen rocks. And then, nothing. I'm suddenly floating, weightless. I break the surface, sputtering, my body aching with battered bruises. Ahead, the creek widens into a calm river. Somehow I made it. I'm alive. Dragging myself onto the bank, I collapse, trembling uncontrollably. Above me, the forest is eerily quiet. The creature seems to be gone. Hours pass in a blur. My body finally gives in to exhaustion, and I sink into a troubled sleep. I'm awakened by the sound of voices. A search and rescue team found me, drawn by the faint signal my radio eventually managed to squeak through. In the days that followed, I told them everything. The creature, the fight in the woods, my desperate escape, the missing ranger they'd been sent to find. The rescue team was concerned, understandably, but there was little they could do. No body, no evidence of the creature, nothing but the shredded remains of my backpack. My story was met with skepticism, post-traumatic stress, maybe hallucinations induced by a head injury. The explanations all sounded reasonable, even to me. And yet, I remember the pale figure slumped on the forest floor, its inhuman, high-pitched scream as the creature closed in. That one detail haunts me, makes me wonder. Now, back at home trying to recover, I find myself drawn to those old stories of vanished rangers. They talk about a hulking, monstrous figure in the woods, about strange tracks no known animal could make, about livestock found gruesomely mutilated. And these stories, scattered across the backwoods of the Yellowstone, have one thing in common. They always name the beast: Scragmaw, Strix, Wendigo. Different words, different tribes, yet they seem to be describing the same impossible creature, the one that nearly took my life. I decide to give it a name too, a word that fits the unsettling sound of its guttural growls, the way its heavy footfalls shook the earth. From now on, in my mind, it will always be the Grand. Maybe it's just a coping mechanism, but it feels important to acknowledge the truth. However horrific and hard to believe, the woods hold things we don't understand, and maybe we're meant not to understand them at all. There was a long pause before Karen responded. "Are you sure, Roy?" "Positive. Male, mid-30s, I'd guess. You need to get the authorities out here fast. Copy that. I'll notify the sheriff and get a team out there. Can you give me your coordinates?" I relayed my location and then sat down on a fallen log, trying to process what I'd just seen. The forest, once a place of solace and peace, now felt menacing, like it was hiding secrets I didn't want to uncover. While I waited for the authorities, I couldn't help but wonder if the body was connected to the abandoned car I'd found earlier. Kevin Mullins, the name on the ID, kept popping into my head. Who was he? What brought him here? And how did he end up dead in the middle of nowhere? It wasn't long before I heard the distant sound of voices and saw the flicker of flashlights through the trees. A group of sheriff's deputies, along with Karen and a couple of other rangers, emerged from the underbrush. I led them to the body, and they immediately began to secure the area and take photographs. "Roy, what can you tell me?" I recounted the events of the day, from finding the car to discovering the body. Haskins listened intently, nodding occasionally. "Sounds like you've had one hell of a day," he said when I finished. "You could say that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll take it from here," Haskins said. "You did good, Roy. Go home. Get some rest." I nodded and made my way back to the ranger station. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Something about this whole situation didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The next day I came into work early, hoping to get some updates on the case. Karen greeted me with a grave expression. "Morning, Roy. Sheriff Haskins wants to see you in his office." "Do you know what it's about?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. "Just go on in," she said, not meeting my eyes. I knocked on the sheriff's office door and entered when I heard his gruff voice. Haskins was sitting behind his desk, a stack of papers in front of him. He gestured for me to sit. "Roy, I've got some news," he began. "The body you found, it was Kevin Mullins. His family reported him missing about a month ago. He was a hiker, came up here on a solo trip." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "Do we know what happened to him?" Haskins shook his head. "Not yet. There were no obvious signs of trauma, no bullet wounds or anything like that. We're waiting on the autopsy results. But there's something else." He continued, leaning forward. "When we searched the area around the body, we found some strange tracks. They weren't animal tracks, and they sure as hell weren't human. I've never seen anything like them before." My curiosity piqued despite the unease gnawing at me. Haskins pulled out a photograph and handed it to me. The image showed a series of footprints in the dirt, each one elongated and clawed, almost reptilian in appearance. "Could it be a hoax?" I asked, though I knew it sounded ridiculous. "Maybe," Haskins replied, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "But until we know more, I want you to stay vigilant out there. If you see anything unusual, you report it immediately, understand?" "Understood," I said, handing the photo back. The rest of the week passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves set my nerves on edge. I doubled my patrols, keeping a closer eye on the trails and the surrounding woods. Then, one evening, just as the sun was dipping below the horizon, I heard something. It was a low, guttural sound, almost like a growl but more primal. I froze, straining to pinpoint the direction it was coming from. My flashlight beam cut through the gathering darkness, but I saw nothing. Probably just a coyote. I muttered to myself, though I didn't believe it. I decided to head back to the station, my pace quickening. As I neared the edge of the forest, I heard it again, closer this time. I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as I reached the clearing, I felt something graze my leg, tearing through my pants and skin. I stumbled but didn't stop, bursting out of the trees and into the open. When I finally made it back to the station, I collapsed on the steps, my leg throbbing with pain. Karen rushed out, her eyes wide with concern. "What happened?" she asked, helping me to my feet. "Something's out there," I gasped, wincing as I put weight on my injured leg. "I don't know what, but it's not human." She helped me inside, and we bandaged my leg. The cut wasn't deep, but it was enough to make me worry. I reported the incident to Haskins, who took it seriously. "We'll set up patrols, see if we can track this thing," he said. "But you're not going out there alone anymore, understood?" "Yeah, I got it," I replied, grateful for the backup. The next few days were tense. We patrolled the park in pairs, always alert for any sign of the creature. One night, as I was on patrol with another ranger named Frank, we heard it again, that same guttural sound. We followed it cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. Then we saw it. A figure, hunched and grotesque, moving through the trees with an unnatural grace. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Tall, with long, spindly limbs and skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. Frank and I froze, too stunned to move. The creature turned its head toward us, and I saw its eyes, large, black, and soulless. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then it moved, faster than anything that size should be able to. Frank and I bolted, running back toward the station as fast as we could. When we burst through the door, gasping for breath, Karen and Haskins were waiting. "We saw it," I panted. "It's real." Haskins didn't waste any time. He organized a full search of the area, bringing in additional personnel and equipment. We scoured the forest, but the creatures seemed to have vanished. The tracks we'd found led us in circles, always disappearing before we could follow them to their source. Weeks turned into months, and the sightings became less frequent. The sense of unease never fully went away, but life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. The authorities ruled Kevin Mullen's death as accidental, citing exposure and dehydration, though those of us who had seen the creature knew better. I still work at the park, though I'm more cautious now. I carry a gun despite the rules, and I never venture into the woods alone. The forest, once a place of peace and solitude, now holds a darker, more sinister presence. Every so often I hear whispers of strange sightings, of hikers who go missing without a trace. I've learned to live with the uncertainty, to accept that there are things in this world that defy explanation. But I'll never forget that summer, and a creature that still haunts my dreams. Working as a park ranger at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park has always been my calling. I'm Thaddeus, by the way, and I swear the solitude and beauty of these mountains are unmatched. Yeah, it gets spooky at night, but the eerie forest noises have never really bothered me. I figure it's the price you pay for this kind of peace. Funny thing is, most folks assume rangers sit around campfires and roast marshmallows all day. Reality is, it's a lot of monotonous trail maintenance and litter pickup. But hey, I can't complain. Besides, sometimes my mind wanders as I'm pulling weeds or fixing up a damaged trail marker. It was exactly during one of these humdrum moments when everything went sideways. It was toward the end of my shift, and I had just finished patching up a section of the Bullhead Trail, right near the crest of the mountain. The sun hung low, dappling the forest with long, spooky shadows. It was my typical route back. I'd walked this path 1,000 times. First I heard it, kind of a snap right behind me. I whipped around, hand on the bear spray attached to my belt. Just a squirrel, I realized, scampering up a nearby oak. I shook my head, laughing a little nervously at myself. I'm tough, but who wouldn't be a bit jumpy alone in the middle of nowhere? I continued down the trail, the crunch of leaves beneath my boots familiar and oddly comforting. Except something felt off. That uneasy sense of being watched, the prickling on the back of my neck. It was back. I spun around quickly again, this time a lot less amused. Nothing except the trees, the breeze, and this weird feeling. Suddenly another crack, this time louder. I froze, every nerve on edge as I scanned the forest. That's when I saw it. Just a flash out of the corner of my eye, something pale and large moving with unnatural speed at the edge of the tree line. My heart hammered a wild rhythm against my ribs. I inched backward, eyes glued to the spot where I'd seen the movement. Nothing but an ordinary-looking stretch of forest floor. Logically, it couldn't be anything other than an animal, right? I'd seen black bears, sure, but nothing that moved like that, so fluid and fast. My blood ran cold. "Hello?" I managed, my voice just a pathetic squeak. It seemed to echo unnaturally loud through the trees. Then I saw it again, a tall, lanky shape lurking between two pines. My ranger training kicked in. I took a deep breath and spoke as authoritatively as possible. "Whatever you are, I suggest you leave now. I'm armed. Bullshit." But I had to try something. A silence so dense it was almost audible fell over the forest. The shape remained motionless between the trees, but I could feel its gaze boring into me. I wasn't even sure if it was human. Something about its posture seemed wrong. I inched backward, every instinct screaming at me to run. But every year in the park taught me that panicking around an unknown threat was a sure way to worsen things. Suddenly the creature stepped into full view. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, tall and spindly with impossibly long limbs. Its skin was a sickly gray, almost translucent, and its eyes, well, let's just say there's a reason I can't tell you their color. They were vacant somehow, as if staring straight through me. It stood there, tilted slightly to the side, studying me with that unnerving gaze. In that moment, I couldn't decide which was worse, the fact that it was real, or the realization that this thing seemed intelligent. Now, I'm not going to claim I'm a brave dude all the time, but I've had my share of scares. So against all my instincts, instead of bolting, I took a trembling step toward it. "Come on now." My voice shook. "You don't have to do this." What was I even saying? Reasoning with an unknown creature, the stress of the situation had clearly fried my brains. The creature didn't budge. If anything, its head tilted even further, a motion that sent a fresh wave of terror coursing through me. It moved then, not in a lunge like a predator, but in a sort of unsettling glide, flowing around the tree trunk with a speed that defied all logic. I fumbled for my bear spray, my fingers useless and clumsy. Panic finally had its vice grip around my throat, and as the creature closed the distance between us, I realized with chilling clarity that I'd made a terrible, terrible mistake. The reality of what was hunting me set in as I fumbled for the bear spray. There was no negotiation, no reasoning. The thing, the creature, whatever it was, it had its sights on me. My muscles, previously locked in terror, suddenly kicked into gear as adrenaline flooded my system. Years of survival preparation in theory became brutal reality in seconds. I ripped the canister of bear spray from my belt in one trembling motion, my eyes never leaving the creature as it flowed gracefully toward me. It was still so unsettlingly silent. In the final moments before it was close enough to attack, I did something almost as dumb as my initial attempt to reason with it. I yelled. Not a war cry or some pathetic outburst, but a name. Stalker. The word just burst out of me, fueled by pure instinct and a desperate need to give this thing, this predator, some sort of identity. It didn't react. It didn't pause its advance. With a final spray of panic, I unleashed a blast of pepper spray directly into the air between us, my eyes squeezing shut against the burning sting in the backwash. When I forced them open, the creature was still there, mere feet away, its silhouette hazy through the fog of the spray. I braced myself for a fight, for pain, for the unknown. Yet it didn't attack, not in the way I expected. Instead, the stalker, damn, the name had stuck in my head, lowered its impossibly long limbs to the ground, its posture shifting. It was almost curious. In that split second of confused hesitation, I turned and ran. I ran the way I had never run before, fueled by an unholy mix of terror and adrenaline. Branches whipped my face, my boots thudded against the leaf-covered ground, my lungs burned. It didn't matter, I just had to run. Behind me, I could hear the stalker, but with an almost methodical thump-thump of its footsteps, like it was in no hurry, like it knew I couldn't escape. That realization hit me harder than any physical blow could have. My legs finally gave out under me, sending me tumbling down a small incline and into a ditch choked with ferns and dead leaves. I gasped for breath, every ragged exhale a testament to the futility of my situation. I was cornered. Minutes passed, or maybe it was seconds. My sense of time was completely shot. Then I heard them. Voices. Real human voices shouting my name. Had I gotten so turned around that I was somehow near the trailhead already? Relief flooded through me, quickly tempered by a chilling realization. They wouldn't find me down here unless... Thaddeus, closer now. It was my partner Melinda and another ranger I barely knew. Were they searching because my shift had ended hours ago, or did they somehow sense my panic, my fear? It didn't matter. Melinda, down here. My voice cracked, barely a whisper. Their footsteps pounded closer, and then there she was, Melinda peering down at me through the tangle of leaves. Thaddeus. Oh my God, what the hell happened? The words stumbled out of me in choked gasps. I couldn't even begin to explain. Instead, I coughed a pathetic, "Just get me out of here." As they helped me scramble out of the ditch, I caught a glimpse of the dense forest beyond. Was it moving, or was it just my eyes playing tricks on me? Melinda squeezed my arm, a worried look on her face, but I couldn't speak. The creature, the stalker, was simply gone. The aftermath was a whirlwind of park police, endless questions and psychological evaluations. They didn't find the stalker, nor did any other rangers who later combed the surrounding forest. Did it disappear? Did it even exist? Even I started to doubt myself, wondering if my mind hadn't simply conjured up a monstrous hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. But late at night, alone in my cabin, I can still feel its eyes on me, an unsettling, almost physical reminder of my encounter. They never reassigned me to that section of the park. I don't think they needed to. I wasn't exactly eager to return. Yet some nights, as the wind howls around my solitary home, I can't help but think that something out there in the vastness of the Great Smokies still remembers me. From when I was about 14 years old, I had a best friend named Spencer. Spencer had a decent-sized family and a big house. We hung out practically nonstop outside of school. He was homeschooled and I was in public school. During the summer, I practically lived at their house. Spencer had an older brother named Keenan. Keenan was about 5 years older than him, and I thought he hung the moon. He was so cool. He listened to great music and played guitar, and I always wanted to be around him. One summer when I was 13, Keenan went to summer camp. He was supposed to visit the Grand Canyon and go kayaking and do a ton of fun stuff. We were jealous. It was weird not having him around all the time, since I basically stayed at their house the entire time. Finally, the day came where Spencer's dad was supposed to go to the airport to pick Keenan up. We were super stoked to hear all about camp. His dad drove up and we ran downstairs to greet them, and yet we didn't see Keenan. His dad had tears running down his face, and he exclaimed, "He didn't make it. He didn't make it, you guys." My heart dropped into my stomach and I started to panic. Keenan walked up right behind him, and they both started laughing. It was a huge dick move. Anyways, we helped him unload his luggage and stayed up until midnight talking about his summer. He had so much to say. He said he had the time of his life, and told us all about how he almost went overboard whitewater rafting, and how he surely would have drowned if he did. As two 13-year-old boys, we were enamored by Keenan and everything he did. We talked about how Spencer and I were going to go to the same camp once we turned 18. It had been a long day, and it was time for all of us to go to bed. Keenan told us he would tell us more in the morning when we woke up. I had fallen asleep and awoken in a cold sweat because of a nightmare I had. In my dream, Spencer and I had went about our entire day that day just as we had before, except when their dad showed up and joked about Keenan dying on his trip. He actually did die. This was practically my idol, and the dream was so vivid. I needed to go and get some water just to calm myself down afterwards. I checked my phone before I headed to the kitchen, and it was 3:30 a.m. The house was so dark and I had to tiptoe to be quiet and make sure not to wake anyone up. As I walk through the den on my way to the kitchen, I see the moonlight spilling into the living room, the only light in the house. I see what I think is a large silhouette, and as I get closer and my eyes adjust, I see Keenan hanging from the ceiling fan. I freak out and run across the room in a dead sprint and turn the light on to see if my eyes were deceiving me. It was him, except he was asleep and standing in the middle of the room underneath the fan, with one of his arms raised straight up over his head. I never knew Keenan to sleepwalk before, and luckily he snapped out of it before I tried to wake him up. He looked at me super confused, looked around and noticed where he was and said, "Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you guys. I guess I developed a bit of a sleepwalking habit at camp." My name is Nicholas Riverblood, 31 years old, and this is my story. A different kind of horror that happened to me in 2005. Back then, I was just a regular guy working as a mechanic in a small town called Stovall, tucked away in the mountains of Idaho. I lived a quiet life with my dog Max in a modest cabin a few miles outside of town. I enjoyed the solitude, the crisp mountain air, and the peacefulness that came with living away from the hustle and bustle. I'd usually start my day with a cup of coffee on my porch, watching the sunrise over the peaks. It was my routine, my little slice of heaven. But one morning, everything changed. Max had been restless the night before, barking at every little sound. I brushed it off as him being overly protective. But looking back, I should have known something was off. The first sign was the newspaper. My friend and neighbor, Tony Wick, delivered it every morning. But that day it was late. When I finally saw Tony's old pickup trembling up the dirt road, I waved him down. "Morning, Tony. You're running late today," I called out. Tony, a grizzled man in his 60s, stepped out of the truck with a grave look on his face. "Morning, Marcus. Yeah, got some bad news. You remember old Sam Jenkins?" "Yeah, of course. What about him?" "Found dead this morning. Torn up pretty bad. Sheriff thinks it was a bear, but it didn't look like any bear attack I've ever seen." Sam Jenkins was a retired forest ranger who lived a couple of miles deeper into the woods. He was the kind of guy who knew these mountains like the back of his hand. If something took him down, it wasn't just any ordinary predator. That news rattled me. I tried to go about my day, but my mind kept wandering back to Sam. After work, I decided to pay a visit to his place, just to see if I could help out or at least get some answers. When I arrived at Sam's cabin, the place was swarming with deputies, and the coroner's van was parked outside. The sheriff, Hank Ranger, was an old friend of mine, so I figured I could get a word with him. "Hank, what's the story here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Walked over, shaking his head. "Marcus, it's bad. Real bad. Whatever did this to Sam wasn't human, and it wasn't a bear either. We found tracks, big ones, but they don't match anything we've seen around here." I felt the chill run down my spine. Tracks? What kind of tracks? Big clawed, almost like a wolf, but way bigger. We're calling in some wildlife experts to take a look. I left feeling more uneasy than ever. Max was acting up again that night, growling and pacing around the cabin. I made sure all the doors and windows were locked tight and kept my shotgun close by just in case. Over the next few days, the tension in town grew. More livestock went missing, and there were sightings of a large, shadowy figure prowling around at night. The experts couldn't identify the tracks, and people were starting to get scared. One night I was jolted awake by a loud crash. Max was barking furiously, and I grabbed my shotgun, heart pounding in my chest. I crept downstairs to find my front door hanging off its hinges. Whatever had broken in had some serious strength. I heard a low, guttural sound coming from the kitchen. I edged closer, shotgun at the ready. As I rounded the corner, I saw it, a massive, hulking figure covered in dark fur, with eyes that seemed to glow in the dim light. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, part man, part beast. Before I could react, it lunged at me. I fired a shot, but it barely seemed to notice. Max threw himself at the creature, and I took the chance to run for my truck. I sped into town, my mind racing. What the hell was that thing, and how was I going to stop it? I reached Hank's place and pounded on the door until he answered. "Marcus? What the hell's going on?" "It's here, Hank. That thing, it's at my cabin. We need to get some men together and take it down before it kills anyone else." Hank didn't waste any time. He gathered a few deputies and we headed back to my place. When we arrived, the cabin was in ruins. Max was nowhere to be seen. My heart sank, but I couldn't afford to lose focus now. We spread out, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The woods were eerily silent, except for the occasional rustle of leaves. Then we heard it, a blood-curdling scream, followed by a loud roar. We followed the sound, guns at the ready. We came upon the creature in a small clearing, standing over the lifeless body of one of the deputies. It turned to face us, baring its teeth. Hank and the others opened fire, but the creature was fast, almost too fast to track. I managed to get a clear shot, hitting it in the shoulder. It let out a howl of pain and bolted into the trees. We chased after it, but it was like trying to catch a shadow. Eventually, we lost its trail. We regrouped at the cabin, shaken and exhausted. "What the hell are we dealing with, Marcus?" Hank asked, looking more scared than I'd ever seen him. "I don't know, Hank, but whatever it is, it's smart, strong, and dangerous. We need a plan." Over the next few days, we fortified the town as best we could. Hank called in reinforcements from nearby counties, and we set up patrols around the clock. But despite our efforts, the attacks continued. People were disappearing, and livestock were found mutilated. One evening, as I was patrolling near the outskirts of town, I heard a noise behind me. I turned to see the creature standing there, watching me with those glowing eyes. It was almost like it was daring me to come after it. I raised my shotgun, but it was gone in a flash, disappearing into the trees. I knew then that this wasn't going to end until one of us was dead. We decided to set a trap. Using some of the livestock as bait, we set up a perimeter and waited. Hours passed, and just when we were about to give up, we heard it, a rustling in the bushes. The creature emerged, cautiously approaching the bait. We held our breath, waiting for the right moment. When it was close enough, we sprang the trap. It thrashed and roared, trying to break free. But we had it. Hank stepped forward, raising his rifle. "This ends now," he said, and fired a single shot into the creature's head. The beast collapsed, letting out one final shuddering breath. We stood there in stunned silence, hardly believing it was over. As we examined the body, we realized it was unlike anything we'd ever seen, part human, part animal, something out of a nightmare. In the days that followed, things slowly returned to normal. People started to come out of their homes again, and the livestock stopped disappearing. But the memory of those nights lingered, a dark shadow over our town. Max never came back. I like to think he went down fighting, protecting me until the end. I got a new dog eventually, but it was never quite the same. The official story was that a rogue bear had been responsible for the attacks, but those of us who were there knew the truth. We knew that there were things in this world that defied explanation, things that lurked in the darkness, waiting for their moment. And though we defeated this one, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't the only one out there, that somewhere in the vast wilderness others like it were watching, waiting for their chance. Life in Stovo went on, but we were never quite the same. We were more vigilant, more cautious, and on those quiet nights when the wind rustled through the trees, I'd find myself looking out into the darkness, wondering what else might be out there, lurking just beyond the edge of the light. The creature was buried in a secluded spot far from town. Hank and I marked the grave, a simple reminder of what we'd faced. We never spoke of it again, not really. What was there to say? Some things were better left unsaid, better left buried in the past. But every now and then, when I'm out in the woods or sitting on my porch with a cup of, I think about that night. I think about the creature, about Sam Jenkins and about Max. And I wonder if, one day, we'll face something like that again. For now, though, I take comfort in the quiet moments, in the simple pleasures of life in a small town. I cherish the peace, knowing how quickly it can be shattered. And I live each day with a little more gratitude, a little more awareness of the fragility of our world. So if you ever find yourself in Stillville, stop by and say hello. I'll be the guy on the porch with a cup of coffee, keeping one eye on the woods and one ear tuned to the sounds of the mountains. Because you never know what might be out there, just waiting for its moment. This happened to me in 1990. I was working as a park ranger in the Sierra Nevada mountains. I was the only one at the station that night. That's what makes it all the more strange. I'd been working for the Park Service for a long time now. I'd seen my share of bears and mountain lions, even a couple of mountain goats. I'm not saying I was ready for anything, just that I wasn't scared. But this was different. I'd been sitting at my desk, staring at the flickering monitor, waiting for the shift to end. It was late, well past midnight. I could hear the coyotes howling in the distance. I'd been living out here for a couple of years now, and the solitude wasn't bothering me anymore. I liked being alone, away from everything. That's when the phone rang. I picked it up. "Hello?" I said. A man's voice, low and gruff, said, "Is this the ranger station?" "Yes, this is it. Who is this?" "They're calling from the campsite up by the lake. They're calling because of their daughter. She's gone." "Gone? You mean missing?" "Yeah, she's gone. We can't find her. Her name is Jill, and she's 7 years old. We've been looking for her for over an hour. It was a warm summer night. Jill was only 7 years old, and I knew the forest in the dark was a dangerous place, even in the summertime. Stay on the line. I'm coming to help. I'll be there in 15 minutes. I grabbed my flashlight and my first aid kit, and I drove up to the campsite. I could see the flashlights bobbing around in the darkness. The campsite was in a clearing in the woods next to a small lake. It was a beautiful spot, especially on a summer night. A man and a woman were standing in the middle of the campsite. "I'm the ranger," I said. "What happened?" "We were just sitting here having some drinks," the man said. "Jill was playing in the woods about 10 feet from here. When we turned around, she was gone. It was like she disappeared into thin air," the woman said. I noticed her fingers were trembling and her skin was pale. She wore her long brown hair in a ponytail, and she looked pale under the faint moonlight. It was an unusually warm night for this part of the country. The man was a big guy. He wore a heavy jacket and a baseball cap. His face was red and his eyes were bloodshot. I tried to gauge how much he'd had to drink. They both looked exhausted and worried. I told them to keep their flashlights on and to stay in the clearing. I would search the woods. The clearing was about 50 feet wide, surrounded by a dense forest. The pines were tall and dark, and they looked like soldiers guarding the entrance to another world. I started to walk into the woods, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The forest smelled damp and earthy. I walked around for what felt like an hour. I walked in circles. I walked up and down. I walked through the trees and then through the undergrowth. I could see the faint glow of the flashlights in the distance. I didn't find anything. I was starting to feel a little scared. I didn't know what had happened to the girl. I started to call her name. "Jill, can you hear me?" I called, but there was only the sound of the crickets chirping in the darkness. I was starting to feel desperate. I walked back to the clearing and asked the parents if they knew anyone who might be in the area. I asked if they had seen anyone else at the campsite, or if they knew if anyone else was walking through the forest. "No, no one else was here," the man said. "This is our first time in this park." "We don't know anyone here," the woman said. I stood there thinking. The woods were vast. There were lots of places a child could get lost. I asked the parents to tell me what Jill was wearing. She was wearing a blue shirt and a pair of red shorts, and she was carrying a stuffed bear. I was starting to feel hopeless. I couldn't find the girl. I didn't know what to do. "I'm going to call it a night," I said. "I'll start again in the morning." The parents didn't say anything. I walked back to my car and drove to the station. I couldn't get the image of the little girl out of my head. The next morning I came back to the campsite. I started searching the woods again. I went to the same places I went to the night before. This time I called Jill's name even louder. I was starting to lose hope. Then I saw it. A small torn blue shirt hanging on a branch of a pine tree. The shirt was covered in mud. I walked over to the tree and picked up the shirt. I could feel the rough texture of the fabric. I held it up to my nose and smelled the musty scent of the forest. There was something else there, though. There was a faint metallic smell, too. I looked up at the tree. It was tall and dark, with branches that reached up to the sky. I looked down at the ground. There were tracks in the mud. It wasn't the tracks of a bear or a mountain lion. They were too small and too irregular. The tracks were the tracks of a human, but they were not the tracks of a normal human. They were too big. The prints were enormous. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew what I had to do. I walked back to the clearing. I told the parents to stay put. I had to find Jill. I started to follow the tracks. I followed them through the woods. They led me deeper and deeper into the forest. The tracks were large and wide, and they were filled with a strange, oily substance that I couldn't place. It seemed to leave a dark stain on the mud. I followed the tracks for what felt like hours. I was starting to get tired. The forest was thick and dark, and I was starting to feel afraid. I thought about calling it a day and starting again in the morning, but something compelled me to keep going. The trail was growing increasingly difficult to follow. The sun was starting to set, and the forest was becoming dark. It was starting to get dark. The sky was turning a deep purple, and the trees were casting long shadows. I finally reached a small clearing. There was a small cabin in the clearing. I could see the light from the window of the cabin. It was the only light in the woods. I approached the cabin cautiously. I was afraid of what I might find inside. I knocked on the door. There was no answer. I tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. I stepped inside the cabin. The air inside the cabin was thick and heavy. It smelled like mildew and damp earth. I could hear the sound of my own breathing. I took a step inside. There was something in the corner of the room. I could see it in the dim light. It was a small blue shirt hanging on a hook. And there was something else, too. There was a small stuffed bear sitting on the floor. The bear was covered in blood. I looked up. I saw it then. I saw it staring at me from the doorway. It was a large humanoid figure covered in matted dark fur. Its skin seemed to be gray, and it had sharp-pointed ears and a long, pointed snout. It had dark eyes that looked like slits. It was tall and strong, and it was covered in scars. It had a mouth full of sharp teeth. It had large hands, and its nails were long and sharp. Its fingers were gnarled. I felt a cold terror running through me. I froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It moved closer. I could see the glint of its eyes in the dim light. It smelled like damp earth and sulfur. It looked like it was from another world. Then, I saw something else. I saw something hanging from the figure's belt. It was a pair of red shorts. I knew then that I was staring at the creature who took Jill. It was the end for Jill. The end for me was coming. The creature was looking at me. Its eyes glowed in the dark. I could see its sharp teeth. I had to get out of there. I turned and ran. I ran through the forest. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept running. I could hear the creature running after me. Its heavy footsteps were getting closer. I ran until I could run no more. I was exhausted. I was gasping for breath. I fell to the ground. I closed my eyes. I waited for the creature to come and kill me. But then I heard a noise. I opened my eyes. I saw it. The creature was gone. I was alone. I got up and started walking. I didn't know where I was going. I was lost. I walked until I saw the lights of the campsite. I walked until I saw the parents. They were crying. I could see the pain in their eyes. I told them that I had found the shirt and the bear, and that the tracks in the woods were not the tracks of a normal human. I told them I had seen the creature who took their daughter. They listened, their faces pale and drawn. I told them that the creature was a creature of the night and that it had killed Jill. I told them that I was sorry, but I couldn't find her. I told them that Jill was dead. The parents were devastated. They sobbed uncontrollably. The woman fell to the ground and covered her face with her hands. I stayed there with them. I stayed there until the sun came up. The next morning I took the parents back to the station. They told me they were going to hire a private investigator. I wished them luck. A couple of days later there was a report in the local newspaper. It was about a missing girl. It wasn't Jill, but it was a girl about Jill's age, and she was wearing a blue shirt and red shorts, and she was carrying a stuffed bear. The report stated that the girl was last seen near a small cabin in the woods. The report didn't say anything about the creature. It didn't say anything about the creature I saw. It didn't say anything about the creature that killed Jill. It didn't say anything about the creature that killed the other girl. I kept my mouth shut. The creature lived in the dark, and I wasn't going to tell anyone about it. My name is Joseph Oakenshield, 39 years old, and this happened to me back in 2005. I was living in a small town called Ironwood in Michigan. A town so quiet the only thing that ever made the news was the annual pie-eating contest. I was just an average guy, worked at the local hardware store, had a wife, 2 kids, and a dog named Rusty. Life was simple, predictable, and I liked it that way. One night after a late shift, I decided to take a different route home. I wanted to surprise my wife, Emma, with a bouquet of wildflowers. I knew she loved them, and there was a patch that grew near the old railroad tracks. It was out of the way, but worth the smile it would bring to her face. As I walked, the sky was darkening, and the air was heavy with the smell of rain. I picked up my pace, thinking about the warmth of home. Rusty would be barking at the door, the kids would be doing their homework, and Emma would be preparing dinner. The thought made me smile. When I reached the tracks, I noticed something odd. There was a figure standing a bit further down, near the abandoned train car that had been there for as long as I could remember. It wasn't unusual for kids to hang out there, but this figure was different. Taller, bulkier, and there was something about the way it moved that sent a chill through me. I shook it off, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I bent down to pick the flowers, but when I looked up again, the figure was closer. I could see it more clearly now. It had this strange, almost animalistic posture. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound casual but firm. "You lost or something?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it moved closer, and I could see its eyes reflecting the dim light. They were yellow, almost glowing. My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't a person, or if it was, something was very wrong. I took a step back, considering my options. Running seemed wise, but my curiosity got the better of me. I took out my phone, but there was no signal. Ironwood had lousy reception at the best of times, and here it was, non-existent. "All right, buddy," I said, more to myself than to whatever this was. "Time to go." I turned and started walking briskly back toward the main road. I could hear the footsteps behind me matching my pace. I didn't dare look back. My mind raced, trying to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe it was just some kid playing a prank. Maybe it was an animal, though I couldn't think of any that walked like that. I reached my truck and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. I got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw it standing there, watching me. My blood ran cold. When I got home, I tried to put it out of my mind. Emma noticed I was a bit shaken, but I told her it was just a long day at work. I didn't want to worry her or the kids. That night, though, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing those footsteps, kept seeing those yellow eyes. The next day at work, I mentioned it to my buddy Joe. Joe was a no-nonsense kind of guy, not easily spooked. He listened, nodding thoughtfully. "Sounds like you've had a run-in with old Ironwood's legend," he said. "Legend?" I scoffed. "What, like Bigfoot or something?" "Sort of," Joe said, leaning in. "There's been stories, about something that roams these parts. They say it's a man who got cursed or something. Turns into a beast at night. It's probably just a bunch of hooey, but you never know." I laughed it off, but his words stuck with me. Over the next few days, things got worse. I started hearing noises at night, like something was scratching at the windows. Rusty would bark like mad, but when I checked, there was nothing there. Emma was getting worried. She suggested we call someone, but who do you call for something like this? One night I decided to put an end to it. I took my old hunting rifle and waited. If there was something out there, I was going to find it and deal with it. I sat on the porch, the night air cool and crisp. Rusty was by my side, growling softly. Hours passed, and I was starting to think maybe it was all just in my head. Maybe Joe was right, and it was just a legend. But then I heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. They were coming from the direction of the tracks. I gripped my rifle, my heart pounding. Rusty was on high alert. His ears perked up. The footsteps got closer, and I could see a shadow moving in the darkness. I raised my rifle, ready to fire. "Who's there?" I called out. "Show yourself." The figure stepped into the light, and my blood ran cold. It was the same creature I had seen before. Tall, bulky, with those eerie yellow eyes. It looked almost human, but not quite. There was something primal about it, something wrong. "Get out of here," I shouted, my voice shaking. "I won't hesitate to shoot." The creature snarled a deep, guttural sound that made my stomach turn. It took a step closer, and I fired. The shot echoed through the night, and the creature let out a howl of pain. It staggered back, but it didn't fall. Instead, it turned and fled into the woods. I stood there, my hands shaking, the rifle still aimed at the spot where the creature had been. Rusty was barking like mad, but I barely heard him. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I called the police, but when they arrived, there was no sign of the creature. No blood, no tracks, nothing. They took my statement and assured me they would look into it, but I could tell they didn't believe me. I couldn't blame them. It sounded crazy even to me. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't focus at work, couldn't sleep at night. I kept hearing that snarl, kept seeing those eyes. Emma was worried sick, and the kids were scared. I had to do something. I decided to go back to the tracks to see if I could find any clues. Joe offered to come with me, and I was grateful for the company. We brought flashlights and my rifle, just in case. When we got there, it was eerily quiet. The tracks were overgrown with weeds, and the old train car looked more dilapidated than ever. We searched the area, but there was nothing. No footprints, no blood, nothing to suggest anything out of the ordinary. Maybe it was just a bear, Joe said, though he didn't sound convinced. Maybe, I replied, though I knew it wasn't. But I've never seen a bear like that. We decided to check the train car. It was rusted and creaky, but the door was ajar. Inside it was dark and musty. We'd shown our flashlights around, and I almost wished we hadn't. There were bones. Human bones scattered across the floor. Some looked old, others more recent. I felt sick to my stomach. Joe cursed under his breath. "We need to call the cops," he said, his voice shaky. I nodded, unable to speak. We backed out of the train car and called 911. The police arrived quickly this time, and they took the situation seriously. The area was cordoned off, and a forensics team was brought in. They identified several missing persons among the remains. The town was in shock. Ironwood wasn't the kind of place where things like this happened. The police conducted a thorough investigation, but they never found any definitive answers. The official story was that it was the work of a serial killer who had used the train car as a dumping ground. But I knew better. I never saw the creature again, and eventually life returned to some semblance of normalcy. Emma and I decided to move, though. We couldn't stay in Ironwood after that. We found a nice place in the city, far away from the tracks and the memories. Sometimes I still hear those footsteps in my dreams. I wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. I don't tell Emma about it. She worries enough as it is. The kids adjusted well to the move. They made new friends, settled into their new schools. Rusty passed away a few years ago, but we got another dog, a little terrier named Max. He's a good dog, but he's no Rusty. I still keep the rifle by my bed just in case. I hope I never have to use it again, but you never know. I've learned to live with the memories, but I don't think I'll ever truly forget what happened in Ironwood. And sometimes late at night when the world is quiet and still, I think about that creature. I wonder if it's still out there, watching, waiting, but I don't dwell on it for long. Life goes on, and so must I. So that's my story. It's not something I talk about often, but it's a part of who I am. If nothing else, it's taught me to be cautious, to trust my instincts, and to always be prepared for the unexpected. Because you never know what's lurking in the darkness, just beyond the edge of the light. This happened to me in 1995. My name is Cameron Medina, and I am 30 years old, and I was born and raised in a tiny speck on the map called Harmony, Idaho. We had more elk than people, and my old man was a logger, a man of few words and fewer comforts. So naturally I followed the call of the wild, trading pine for Ponderosa, becoming a park ranger at the sprawling Yellowstone National Park. The summer of '97 was a scorcher. Fires raged in the distance, turning the sky into a canvas of apocalyptic hues. Tourists were scarce, seeking refuge from the relentless heat. It was during those quiet days, amidst the smoldering wilderness, that I stumbled upon something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I was on my routine patrol of the park's southeastern corner, a less frequented area near the Snake River. The terrain was rugged, a maze of obsidian lava flows and twisted lodgepole pines. As I navigated a particularly narrow pass, a flash of movement in the distance caught my eye. I raised my binoculars, expecting to see a bear or maybe a lone wolf, but what I saw instead sent a chill down my spine. It was a figure, humanoid in shape but distorted and elongated. Its limbs were abnormally long, ending in sharp claw-like appendages. The skin was a sickly pale, almost translucent, stretched taut over protruding bones. The head was small and misshapen, with deep-set eyes that seemed to glow with a malevolent light. I lowered my binoculars, my heart pounding in my chest. Was this some kind of elaborate hoax? A park visitor playing a twisted prank? I fumbled for my radio, intending to call for backup, but my hand shook so badly I couldn't even press the button. As I watched, the creature began to move. It wasn't a graceful movement, more of a lurching, staggering gait. It seemed to be heading in my direction. Panic surged through me, and I stumbled back, my boots skidding on the loose rocks. I regained my footing and ran, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I scrambled over boulders, ducked under low-hanging branches, my lungs burning with the effort. The sound of snapping twigs and rustling leaves behind me spurred me on. I burst out of the forest and onto a wide clearing. I dared a glance back, and my blood ran cold. The creature was still there, closer than before. Its eyes fixated on me. It was gaining on me, its grotesque limbs propelling it across the terrain with surprising speed. I sprinted towards my truck, parked at the edge of the clearing. I fumbled with the keys, my fingers numb with fear. The creature's guttural snarl echoed across the clearing, sending a fresh wave of terror through me. I finally managed to unlock the door and flung myself into the driver's seat. I slammed the door shut and fumbled for the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I jammed the truck into gear, tires squealing as I sped away. In the rearview mirror, I saw the creature stop at the edge of the forest, its misshapen head tilted as it watched me disappear into the distance. I recounted my terrifying encounter. My colleagues listened with a mixture of skepticism and concern. Some dismissed it as a hallucination brought on by stress and fatigue. Others, those who had spent years in the wilderness, looked at me with a knowing glint in their eyes. They had heard whispers of such creatures, passed down through generations of park rangers and local Native American tribes. A search party was dispatched to the area, but they found no trace of the creature. There were no footprints, no broken branches, nothing to suggest its existence. I was left to grapple with the chilling reality of what I had seen, alone with my fear and uncertainty. In the weeks that followed, I became a recluse, avoiding the forest, the shadows, even my own reflection. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, hunted, haunted by nightmares of the creature's glowing eyes and skeletal limbs. One night, as I sat alone in my cabin, a flicker of movement outside my window caught my attention. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I peered out into the darkness, and there it was, silhouetted against the moonlit sky. The creature. It stood motionless, its eyes burning into me with a chilling intensity. I stumbled back from the window, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I reached for my gun, but my hand shook so violently I couldn't even hold it steady. I fumbled for the door, desperate to escape. As I flung open the door, the creature lunged. I saw a flash of pale skin and razor-sharp claws, felt a searing pain in my arm. I screamed, the sound echoing through the silent night. I swung blindly, my fist connecting with something solid. The creature recoiled with a hiss, and I used the opportunity to flee. I ran through the woods, my injured arm throbbing with pain. I didn't look back, didn't dare to stop until I reached the safety of the ranger station. My colleagues found me there, collapsed on the steps, my clothes torn and blood soaking my shirt. I told them what had happened, but they could see the terror in my eyes, the wounds on my arm. They believed me. The creature's existence could no longer be denied. It was a predator, a stalker, a thing of nightmares made real. The park was closed to visitors, and a team of experts was brought in to investigate. They searched for days, combing the forests, scouring the riverbanks, but the creature remained elusive. It seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind only fear and unanswered questions. The park eventually reopened, but the atmosphere was different. A sense of unease lingered, a shadow hanging over the once pristine wilderness. Visitors whispered about the creature, their eyes darting nervously into the shadows. I resigned from my position as a park ranger, unable to bear the constant reminders of my encounter. I moved away, seeking solace in the anonymity of a crowded city. But the memories haunted me, the fear a constant companion. I heard a news report about a series of unexplained disappearances in the park. Hikers, campers, even a ranger had vanished without a trace. The authorities had no leads, no suspects. But I knew what lurked in the shadows, what preyed on the unsuspecting, and I knew that it was still out there, somewhere in the vast wilderness, waiting, watching for its next victim. In the end, they did find it. Not me, but some other poor soul who wandered too far from the beaten path, found them torn to shreds, bones cracked open like lobster claws. I wasn't surprised, but it hurt. It hurt to know that thing was still out there, hungry. Maybe it always was. Maybe it always will be. Maybe it's just nature's way of reminding us we're not as in control as we think we are. We're just meat after all. Just another meal for the beast in the dark. The beast that doesn't have a name doesn't need one. It's just the beast. And it's waiting. My name is Dylan Thunderstrike, 47 years old, and this all went down in 2009 in the small town of Dry Creek, Montana. I was working as a mechanic at the local garage, and life was pretty straightforward. I lived in a modest house at the edge of town, close enough to walk to work but far enough to enjoy some peace and quiet. I liked to fish, watch football, and knock back a few beers with my buddies at the bar. Pretty normal stuff, you know. One Friday, after a long week of fixing engines and changing oil, I decided to head to the local dive, Rosie's Pub, for a cold one. I met up with my friends Wade and Dennis. We shot some pool, talked about the game, and shared a few laughs. Everything was fine until this stranger walked in. He was tall, probably 6 feet 4 inches, with shaggy black hair and eyes that seemed too dark to be normal. He had this intense vibe, like he didn't belong. We noticed him because, in a town as small as Dry Creek, everyone knows everyone. New faces stick out like a sore thumb. He didn't talk to anyone, just ordered a drink and sat in the corner, watching. At first, we didn't think much of it, just another drifter passing through. But something about him felt off. As the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching us, specifically me. Every time I glanced his way, he was staring, unblinking, like he was trying to figure me out. It was unsettling, but I tried to ignore it, focusing on my friends and our game. When it was time to leave, Wade and Dennis offered to give me a lift home, but I declined. It was a cool night, and I figured the walk would do me good. Plus, I'd had a few too many beers, and the fresh air might help clear my head. As I walked down Main Street, I had that eerie feeling you get when you know you're not alone. I glanced over my shoulder, and sure enough, the stranger was trailing me, keeping his distance but clearly following. I picked up my pace, hoping to lose him, but he matched my speed. I turned the corner and ducked into an alleyway between the hardware store and the bakery. My heart pounded as I waited, hoping he'd pass by without noticing, but no such luck. He stepped into the alley, his silhouette tall and menacing in the dim light. "What do you want?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer, just kept walking toward me, his eyes locked on mine. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. He was close now, too close. In a sudden burst of adrenaline, I lunged forward, trying to push past him and escape. But he was fast, inhumanly fast. He grabbed me by the arm and threw me against the wall like I weighed nothing. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I slumped to the ground, gasping. He stood over me, and that's when I saw his eyes up close. They weren't just dark, they were pitch black, like looking into a void. His mouth twisted into a grin, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too long to be human. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but it was like something out of a nightmare. Before I could react, he reached down and grabbed me by the throat, lifting me off the ground with one hand. I kicked and struggled, but his grip was like iron. My vision started to blur, and just when I thought I was done for, he spoke. I don't remember much after that, just bits and pieces. Being dragged through the streets, the cold air on my face, the distant sound of barking dogs. I must have passed out because the next thing I knew, I was lying on a cold, hard floor in what looked like an abandoned cabin. The room was dark, the only light coming from a small window high up on the wall. I tried to move, but my hands were tied behind my back, and my ankles were bound together. Panic set in as I struggled against the ropes, but they were too tight. "Hey, let me go," I shouted, hoping someone would hear me. A door creaked open and the stranger stepped into the room. He was holding a knife, the blade glinting in the dim light. My heart pounded in my chest as he approached, the grin never leaving his face. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. He didn't answer, just knelt down beside me and placed the knife against my cheek. I could feel the cold steel against my skin, and I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the worst. But he didn't cut me. Instead, he leaned in close and whispered in my ear, "Because I can." With that, he stood up and walked out, leaving me alone in the dark. I struggled against the ropes for what felt like hours, my wrists raw and bleeding, but it was no use. I was trapped. At some point I must have fallen asleep because I woke up to the sound of voices outside. It was still dark, but I could make out two figures through the window, talking in hushed tones. One of them was the stranger, and the other was someone I didn't recognize, a tall, burly man with a beard. "We need to move him," the bearded man said. "It's not safe here," the stranger nodded. Tonight panic surged through me. I had to get out, and I had to do it now. I wriggled and twisted, trying to loosen the ropes, and finally I felt them give with renewed determination. I kept at it until I managed to free my hands. My wrists were a mess, but I didn't care. I untied my ankles and scrambled to my feet, my heart racing. I had no idea where I was or how to get out, but I knew I had to try. I crept to the door and peered out. The cabin was in the middle of the woods, surrounded by trees and darkness. The two men were still talking, their backs to me. I took a deep breath and made a run for it. Branches whipped at my face as I sprinted through the woods, my lungs burning with every breath. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to get away. Behind me I could hear shouts and footsteps, but I didn't dare look back. I stumbled and fell more times than I can count, but I kept going. I had to. Finally I burst out of the trees and onto a dirt road. In the distance I saw headlights and waved my arms frantically, praying it was someone who could help. The car screeched to a halt, and an elderly couple got out. "What happened?" the woman asked, her eyes wide with concern. "Please help me," I gasped. "They're after me." They didn't need any more convincing. They helped me into the car and sped off, leaving the cabin and the nightmare behind. We drove to the nearest town, and they took me to the police station. I told my story, but I could see the skepticism in the officers' eyes. They said they'd investigate, but I knew they didn't believe me. It sounded too crazy, too unreal. A few days later they found the cabin, but it was empty. No sign of the stranger or his accomplice, no evidence of what had happened. It was like they had vanished into thin air. I moved away from Dry Creek after that. I couldn't stay, not after what happened. I never saw the stranger again, but sometimes late at night I can still see those black eyes staring at me, hear his voice whispering in my ear. Life went on, but I was never the same. I kept looking over my shoulder, waiting for the day he'd come back. But he never did, or maybe he's still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment. But I know I'll be ready. This happened to me in 1993. My name is Ian Godinez, and I am 32 years old. I worked as a park ranger in the Gila National Forest in New Mexico. It's a hell of a place to get lost. That's what I used to tell the tourists anyway, slapping my thigh and giving a good old chuckle. I like the tourists mostly. They reminded me there was a world outside of these canyons and pines. My wife Betsy, she always said I was too fond of solitude, said it wasn't natural. Maybe she was right. 20 years in this job and I could count my close friends on one hand. Of course, that never bothered me much. I got along fine with the quiet. It was late September, air already getting that crisp bite to it. The tourists had thinned out, heading back to their cities and their lives. I was on patrol, driving the old Jeep down a fire road, dust kicking up behind me. It was getting toward dusk. That time of day the light goes gold and the shadows grow long. I stopped to take a leak, leaning against the Jeep, the engine ticking cool. That's when I saw it. It was moving down the hillside a good distance away. It wasn't a bear. Too tall and lanky for that. Not a mountain lion either, the way it walked, too upright, too purposeful. It looked almost human. But there was something off about its proportions, the limbs too long, the head small and sunk into its shoulders. It was dark, almost black against the sun-soaked hillside. I watched it until it disappeared into the trees, felt a prickle of unease. Something about it just felt wrong. The next day I was back in the same area, checking on a report of illegal campfires. Found the site easy enough. Smoldering ashes and beer cans scattered around, nobody there. I was picking up the trash, stuffing it into a bag when I smelled it. It wasn't the sharp stink of smoke or the sweet rot of garbage. It was a thick, cloying, almost metallic odor, like blood, but worse, much worse. I followed the smell. It led me to a thicket of scrub oak, the leaves rustling in the breeze. I pushed through the branches, the stench getting stronger. That's where I found him. Young man, maybe early 20s, lying twisted and broken on the ground. His face was pale, eyes wide and staring. His clothes were shredded, deep gashes covering his body. The metallic stench was overwhelming. I dropped the bag, stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest. Never seen anything like it. Not in all my years in the forest. Animals don't do that. Not to their prey, not to their own kind. I radioed it in. Sheriff came out with a couple deputies, faces grim, took one look and called in the state police crime scene investigation, the whole 9 yards. They poked and prodded, took pictures, bagged evidence, whispered amongst themselves, shaking their heads. The coroner came, loaded the body into a black bag, zipped it shut. It was a quiet drive back to town. Nobody said much. We all knew this wasn't a normal killing. They interviewed me, of course, wanted to know what I'd seen, what I knew. I told them about the creature I'd seen the day before, described it as best I could. They didn't believe me, not at first, called it shock, said my mind was playing tricks. They had their theories, of course, drug deal gone bad, psychotic drifter. They even looked at me sideways for a while. Small town, everyone knows everyone. Stranger things have happened, but I knew what I'd seen, and I knew it wasn't human. Not entirely. The investigation dragged on. Days turned into weeks. They never caught anyone, never even found another clue. The newspapers had a field day. Gila Forest Killer, they called him, or it. They printed pictures of the victim. His name was Ryan something. Said he was a college kid hiking the Continental Divide Trail. Said he'd gone missing weeks ago. Betsy worried about me. Said I wasn't sleeping, that I was jumpy on edge. She was right. I couldn't shake the image of Ryan's body, the smell, the way the leaves had rustled in the wind. I started carrying my .38 on patrol, felt naked without it. One night, weeks after the murder, I was driving back from the ranger station late. The road was empty, the moon high and bright, casting long shadows through the trees. It was that quiet kind of night you get in the mountains, the kind that makes you feel small. Then I saw it. Standing in the middle of the road, same tall, lanky figure, the head small and sunk into its shoulders. It was darker than the night, its eyes 2 glowing embers in the moonlight. I slammed on the brakes, the Jeep skidding to a halt. It didn't move, watching me. I reached for my .38, fumbled it out of its holster. My hand was shaking. "Get out of the road," I said. My voice sounded thin and reedy in the stillness. It didn't respond, just kept staring. I raised the gun, aiming it at the creature's chest. I said, "Get out of the road." My voice cracked. I wasn't sure if I wanted to shoot it or if I just wanted it to move, to prove it was real. To justify the fear that was gnawing at my gut. It took a step toward me. Its movements were slow and deliberate, almost graceful. I tightened my grip on the gun. It stopped again, maybe 10 feet away. I could hear it breathing, a low rasping sound. Then it did something unexpected. It reached out its hand, not to attack, but almost in supplication, like it was offering me something, or asking for something. I didn't understand. I didn't know what it wanted. And in that moment of confusion, fear took over. I fired. The shot echoed through the night, the sound deafening in the stillness. The creature stumbled back, a high-pitched keening sound escaping its lips. It clutched at its chest, its fingers digging into the flesh. Dark viscous blood oozed between its fingers. Then it turned, melting back into the trees, disappearing into the darkness. I sat there in the Jeep, the gun still in my hand, heart hammering against my ribs. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. I could still hear it, the creature's keening cry echoing in my ears. I never saw it again, but I knew it was out there waiting. When I reported the incident, they dismissed it, said I'd imagined it, that I was cracking under the pressure. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew what it was capable of. They closed the Ryan case eventually. Lack of evidence, no suspects, case closed. But the murders didn't stop. There were whispers, rumors, hikers disappearing, campers found mutilated. But they were always far from the trail, deep in the wilderness, easy to dismiss, easy to forget. I left the Forest Service a few years later. Betsy was right. I needed a change. I couldn't handle the silence anymore. Not after what I'd seen. We moved to Albuquerque, bought a little house, started over. But the Gila is still out there. And so is the creature. I know it. Sometimes I wake up in the night sweating, the metallic stench filling my nostrils. I hear the rustling of leaves, the keening cry echoing in the darkness. And I know it's still out there. Waiting. They found a body last year. Up in the Gila, young woman hiking alone. The details were eerily familiar. Deep gashes, shredded clothes, the metallic stench of blood. They never caught anyone. The newspapers called it another unsolved mystery. But I know the truth. It's out there waiting, and it's not done hunting. My name is Ethan Eagleclaw, 28 years old, and this happened to me back in 1998. I was a junior in college at the time, trying to balance a full course load while working nights at a local diner in Laramie, Wyoming. Life was pretty straightforward, though not without its share of struggles. Between classes, work, and an ongoing feud with my roommate over his terrible taste in music, I had a lot on my plate. I figured I was just your average, everyday college kid trying to make it through. One night, after a particularly rough shift, I decided to walk home instead of taking the bus. The fresh air helped clear my head, and the quiet was a nice change from the constant clatter of the diner. Laramie isn't a big town, but it's got its share of dark corners and quiet streets, especially at night. I took a shortcut through an alley behind a row of old warehouses. The area was mostly abandoned, just a few businesses still operating during the day. At night it was dead quiet. It wasn't the first time I'd taken this route. It shaved a good 10 minutes off my walk. But this night felt different. The air was heavy, and the only sound was the distant hum of a generator somewhere far off. As I made my way down the alley, I noticed something strange. A thick metallic smell hung in the air like rust and old blood. I shrugged it off, assuming it was just some leaking pipe or something. But then about halfway through the alley, I tripped over something. I looked down and saw a torn piece of fabric, dark and stained. My heart skipped a beat. But I told myself it was just trash, part of the usual urban decay. Just as I was about to continue on, I heard a faint noise. It sounded like a groan, low and pained. I froze, straining to hear more. The groan came again, more distinct this time, from behind one of the dumpsters up ahead. I took a few hesitant steps forward, squinting into the darkness. My eyes slowly adjusted, and I could make out a shape slumped against a brick wall. "Hey, you okay?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the stillness. No response, just another groan, weaker this time. Against my better judgment, I approached. What I saw made my stomach turn. A man, maybe in his mid-30s, was sprawled on the ground, his clothes torn and stained with blood. His face was a mess of cuts and bruises, one eye swollen shut. He looked like he'd been mauled by some kind of animal. "Holy shit," I muttered, kneeling beside him. "Hey, can you hear me?" He tried to speak, but only a ragged breath escaped his lips. I fumbled for my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed 911. The operator picked up, and I gave them my location, explaining as best I could what had happened. "An ambulance is on its way," the operator assured me. "Stay with him if you can, but don't move him." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Got it." As I waited, I glanced around the alley, suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow and sound. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting something to jump out at us. It felt like an eternity before I heard the distant wail of sirens. The paramedics arrived, and I stepped back to let them work. They loaded the man onto a stretcher, still unconscious, and hurried him into the ambulance. One of the paramedics, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, asked me a few questions before they took off, leaving me alone in the alley. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. My mind raced with questions. Who was that guy? What had happened to him? And more importantly, what kind of animal could do that to a person? Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the incident. I asked around at the diner and among my friends, but no one had heard anything. It was like the whole thing had been a bad dream, except for the blood-stained alley and the memory of that man's battered face. About a week later, I got a call from the Laramie Police Department. They wanted to ask me some questions about what I had seen. I agreed, hoping they might have some answers for me. The detective I spoke with, a grizzled guy named Tom Strickland, had a demeanor that screamed, "I've seen it all. Mr. Mercer," he began, flipping open a worn notebook. "We appreciate you coming in. We're trying to piece together what happened to Mr. Alan Hewitt, the man you found." "Do you have any idea what did that to him?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. Strickland sighed, rubbing his temples. "We're still investigating. The injuries, they don't match any animal attacks we're familiar with, and there's no indication of a weapon being used, at least not a conventional one." "What does that mean?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "It means we don't know yet," he replied, his tone a bit sharper. "We were hoping you might have seen or heard something that could help." I recounted everything again, from the metallic smell to the groans and the blood-stained fabric. Strickland took notes, nodding occasionally, but his expression remained unreadable. "We'll be in touch if we have any more questions," he said finally, standing up to signal the end of our meeting. As I walked out of the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't telling me everything. There was something in Strickland's eyes, a hint of unease that didn't match his gruff exterior. Life went on, as it tends to do, but I couldn't shake the incident from my mind. I started taking different routes home, avoiding the alley altogether. Every now and then I'd hear whispers about strange sightings around town, people seeing shadows moving in the night, hearing earring noises that didn't quite make sense, but nothing concrete, nothing I could pin down. Then, about a month later, I ran into an old friend, Max Collins, at the diner. Max and I had gone to high school together, but we'd lost touch after graduation. He was a big guy, the kind who seemed like he could handle himself in a fight, but he looked more nervous than I'd ever seen him. "Carl, man, you got a minute?" he asked, glancing around like he was afraid of being overheard. "Sure, Max." "What's up?" I said, motioning for him to sit down. He slid into the booth, lowering his voice. "You hear about the weird stuff going on around here lately?" I nodded. "Yeah, bits and pieces. Why?" Max leaned in closer. "I've seen something, man. Something I can't explain." My curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" "It was a couple nights ago," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was out by the old railroad tracks, you know, where the woods start getting thick. I heard something moving in the trees, figured it was just a deer or something, but then I saw it. This thing. It was huge on all fours, but not like any animal I've ever seen. Its eyes, Carl, they were like burning coals. A chill ran down my spine. You sure it wasn't just a bear or something?" Max shook his head vehemently. "No way, man, this thing was different. It had this presence, like it knew I was there, like it was watching me." I didn't know what to say. Max wasn't the type to scare easily, and the fear in his eyes was real. "Did you tell anyone else?" I asked. He shook his head. "Just you. People would think I'm crazy, but I know what I saw." We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of his words hanging between us. Finally, I broke the silence. "Thanks for telling me, Max. Just be careful, all right?" He nodded, standing up to leave. "You too, Carl. Something's not right in this town." After that conversation, I started to pay more attention to the rumors, to the stories people whispered when they thought no one was listening. And the more I listened, the more I realized that Max wasn't alone. There were others who had seen things, heard things, but they were too scared to speak up. One night, as I was closing up the diner, I heard a noise outside. It was a low, guttural sound, almost like a growl, but deeper, more menacing. My heart raced, and I grabbed a kitchen knife, the closest thing to a weapon I could find. I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my face. The street was empty, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I scanned the area, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow, and then I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes stared back at me from the darkness, unblinking, almost curious. The creature was huge, covered in matted fur, its body hunched and muscular. It was like nothing I'd ever seen, a nightmare made flesh. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. I knew I had to get inside, but my legs felt like lead. The creature took a step forward, its eyes never leaving mine, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it turned and vanished into the night. I stood there shaking, the knife clutched tightly in my hand. I knew I had to tell someone, but who would believe me? But that was it. Everyone else would think I was crazy. Over the next few days I tried to go about my life as usual, but the memory of those eyes haunted me. I started carrying the knife with me everywhere, a small comfort in the face of the unknown. Then one evening, as I was getting ready for my shift, I got a call from Detective Strickland. "We need you to come down to the station. It's about Mr. Hewitt." I felt a lump form in my throat. "Is he okay?" There was a pause. "Just come down. We'll explain everything." I arrived at the station, my mind racing with possibilities. Strickland met me at the door, his expression as serious as ever. "Follow me," he said, leading me to a small interrogation room. Inside, there were photos spread out on the table. Photos of Alan Hewitt, but not just of him. There were others too, people I didn't recognize, all with the same horrific injuries. "We've been looking into similar cases," Strickland explained, gesturing to the photos. I glanced at the images, my stomach churning. "What do you think is doing this?" Strickland shook his head. "We're not sure. But whatever it is, it's not human." His words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because you're the only one who's come forward," he replied. "And we need your help." Over the next few weeks, I worked with the police, sharing everything I knew, everything I'd heard. We pieced together a rough map of the sightings, trying to find a pattern. But it was like chasing a ghost. The creature, whatever it was, seemed to move at random, striking without warning. One night I got a call from Max. His voice was frantic, barely coherent. "Carl, it's here. It's outside my house." My blood ran cold. "Stay inside, Max. I'm calling the cops." I dialed 911, explaining the situation as best I could. Then I grabbed the knife and ran out the door, my heart pounding in my chest. Max lived on the edge of town, near the woods. As I approached his house, I saw the lights on, the front door ajar. I burst inside, calling his name. "Max, where are you?" No answer. I moved through the house, my grip tightening on the knife. The living room was empty, as was the kitchen. But then I heard a noise from the backyard, a low rumbling sound that made my blood run cold. I stepped outside, my eyes scanning the darkness, and then I saw it. The creature was standing over Max's lifeless body, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. I felt a surge of rage and fear, my mind screaming at me to run, but my feet stayed rooted to the ground. The creature looked up, its eyes locking onto mine. For a moment we just stared at each other, a silent challenge hanging between us, and then it lunged. I swung the knife, catching it across the shoulder. It let out a roar of pain, staggering back. I took the opportunity to run, my legs finally obeying. I didn't stop until I reached the street, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The cops arrived a few minutes later, their sirens blaring. I pointed them towards the backyard, unable to form coherent words. They moved in, guns drawn, but by then the creature was gone, leaving only Max's body and a trail of blood. In the aftermath, the town was in an uproar. People demanded answers, but there were none to give. The police increased their patrols, and for a while the sightings stopped. But the fear lingered, a shadow over Laramie that no one could shake. As for me, I moved away, transferring to a college in another state. I never told anyone what really happened, not even my closest friends. But every now and then I'd hear a story, a rumor of strange sightings in the night, and I'd remember those glowing eyes, the feeling of being watched. It's been years since that night, but I still carry the knife with me, a small comfort in a world that no longer feels as safe as it once did. I don't know what that creature was or why it chose Laramie, but I do know one thing. Some things are better left in the dark where they belong. This happened to me in 1966. My name is Jack Quintana, and I'm 39 years old. I'm just a regular guy, worked my whole life, never caused no trouble. Grew up in Montana, learned the value of hard work early. Been a park ranger for the past 15 years out here in the Bitterroot National Forest. Never seen anything like it before and haven't seen anything like it since. It was a Tuesday, scorching hot even for August. The tourists were mostly gone, back to their city lives. Just me, the silence, and the smell of pine needles baking in the sun. I was doing my usual rounds, checking for fire hazards, making sure the trails were clear. The usual. I was heading up towards Trapper Peak. Decided to take the long way around, the old logging trail. It's overgrown now, mostly used by deer and the occasional lost hiker. Been meaning to clear it out, but you know how it is. Never enough time. That's where I saw it. At first I thought it was a bear, way off in the distance. It was crouched low to the ground, rummaging through something. But as I got closer, something wasn't right. Bears don't move like that. Jerky and quick, almost twitchy. I stopped, hid behind a thick ponderosa pine. The wind was in my face, thankfully, so it couldn't smell me. It stood up, full height now, damn near 7 feet tall, lean and muscled like a wolf, but it moved on 2 legs. The skin was gray, hairless, stretched tight over bones. Its head was small, perched atop a long neck, eyes like black marbles, no expression in them at all. Whatever it wasn't right, not natural. It didn't see me, thank God. It finished rooting through whatever it was. Couldn't tell from that distance. But it looked like clothes. And then it moved on, melting into the trees like smoke. I stood there for a while, heart thumping like a jackrabbit in a snare, tried to rationalize it. Had to be a bear, right? Maybe a sick one, hairless from mange. But deep down I knew it wasn't. I finished my patrol, couldn't shake the image of that thing out of my head. Told my buddy Jack about it, the other ranger on duty that week. He laughed, said I'd been out in the sun too long, but I saw the doubt in his eyes. Next day, word came over the radio. Couple of hikers, young ones, went missing near Trapper Peak. Search and rescue was called in, the whole 9 yards. I volunteered, of course. Couldn't sit around doing nothing. We searched for 3 days, found nothing. Then on the 4th day, Jack found them, or what was left of them. It wasn't pretty. She was ripped apart, limbs scattered like kindling. The boy, he was mostly intact, but his face was, well, let's just say it wasn't recognizable anymore. I knew right then what had done it. The sheriff, he blamed it on a mountain lion, said it was a freak occurrence. They always do. Nobody wants to admit that something like that, something that walks on 2 legs and tears apart people like paper dolls, could exist. Easier to blame it on a wild animal, but I knew the truth. Didn't sleep much after that. Kept seeing those black eyes, that twitchy movement. Every shadow in the forest looked like that thing. Every rustle of leaves sent shivers down my spine. Started carrying my rifle on patrol, even though it was against regulations. Didn't care. Couldn't shake the feeling that it was out there, watching me. Few weeks later, another hiker went missing. This time a lone fisherman disappeared near the same area. Same story, search and rescue. Nothing found. Then a few days after that, I saw it again. It was dusk, the light fading fast. I was driving back from a late patrol heading back to the ranger station, and there it was standing by the side of the road, staring at me with those dead eyes. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding on the gravel. It didn't move, just stood there watching me. I reached for my rifle, fumbling with the safety. By the time I got it ready, it was gone. Vanished, like it was never there. I reported it, of course, told the sheriff everything, showed him the tracks, the strange, almost inhuman footprints. He didn't believe me. Not really. Said it was probably a bear or a prankster. I knew he was wrong. They never found the fisherman, never found any other missing hikers. The disappearances just stopped, like the thing had gotten what it wanted and moved on. But I still remember. I still see those eyes in my dreams. And I know, somewhere out there in the dark heart of the forest, it's still watching. Quit being a ranger not long after. Couldn't take it anymore. Moved back to Montana, took up carpentry. It's quiet work, honest work, keeps the shadows at bay. People ask me sometimes why I left the forest. I tell them it was the quiet, the loneliness they don't understand. They never do, but I know the truth, and I know I'll never forget it. Not as long as I live. They found something a few years back near the area where the hikers disappeared. A cave hidden deep in the woods. Inside there were bones, human bones, and strange markings on the walls, symbols nobody could decipher. They never released the full details. Said it was a sensitive matter. Said it was an old Native American burial ground. But I saw the photos, leaked online, those symbols. They weren't Native American. They were something else, something older. I don't know what it was, that thing in the woods. Don't know where it came from or what it wanted, but I know it was real. And I know it's still out there somewhere, watching, waiting. And I pray to God I never see it again. Hello, my name is Gagi, and I'm here to tell whoever is here my story and what is going on. I have lived in New Mexico inside the Navajo reservation since I was born, 17 now. Since I was a young boy, my grandmother, who worked as a cashier in her own shop which sold old Navajo relics, would tell me of skinwalkers. She never said anything bad about them. She told me of how her aunt was one, how she would always see an odd-looking deer looking at her through her bedroom window at midnight when she was a young girl. She said its eyes were pure black and it wouldn't move. She once tried to wave at it, and when she did, the deer, she said, rose up on its hind legs and walked towards my window. She could hear the crunching of leaves and branches get louder and faster as it approached her window. Her bed was right next to the window. She got scared and pulled the very thin sheets over her head. The moonlight seemed to cast a shadow of the deer on her sheets. She lay there trembling in fear as she saw the what seemed to be hands of the shadow scratch on the window. When she was telling me that part of the story, she very quietly said, "They were not hooves, they were hands. Fingers, the deer had hands." It began to scratch at her window. She saw its long, disgusting nails through her very thin sheets. All of a sudden she heard whispers saying, "Open the window," in Navajo. The deer thing's shadow started to become something else, she said, whilst she heard cracking and snapping of what she said to be bones, not a deer anymore, but a person she saw in the shadow. She peeked through her sheets for an instant and said she saw a very ugly old lady, staring at her with the same eyes the deer had, pure black. She said it reminded her of death. She didn't move 1 inch until finally the old lady trotted back into the forest. The deer never came back, but my grandma said there was always a deer that would follow her home from school, right at the edge of the tree line. So this is where my story begins. I was that stupid little boy that would always be outside, up to no good. Climbing trees, throwing rocks into the river. I wouldn't go inside until my grandma made me. I would always run through the forest in my backyard by myself. I would see the occasional deer, and I would run at it to spook it off, until one day I saw a deer, very large, shaggy-looking hide, and it hadn't seen me. I sneakily came up behind it. I was only feet away from it when it suddenly turned its head to me. It had black eyes, dead eyes. We stared at each other for what seemed to be hours in my head. It then stood up on its hind legs and ran off into the thick forest faster than I've ever seen a deer run. The disturbing part was the ear-splitting screech it sent out as it galloped into the forest. I quickly ran home and didn't want to go out into the forest anymore. I lived in a house that was held up, which meant it had a crawl space. Small animals like possums liked to hide there sometimes, so I would never go down there. One night when I was on my bed doing my homework, I heard scratching on the floor of my room coming from the crawl space. This had never happened before. This scratching came from the floor beneath my bed. I, the stupid kid I was, got a broomstick and smacked the wooden floor 3 times as hard as I could. Suddenly the scratching stopped for a couple seconds. I sighed a sigh of relief, and then I heard 3 slow thuds beneath my bed. Whatever was making the scratching noises copied me. It started pounding on the floor. I felt my bed shake very slightly with each coming thud. I suddenly stopped moving. The fear hit me all at once, and I lay there on my bed sobbing until it stopped. A couple moments after it stopped, I saw through a crack in the shutters of my window a disheveled-looking man crawl out from under my house and run off into the tree line. Every night after that I hear whispers coming from under my floorboards, faint scratching and pounding, and I see the same shifty coyote hiding in the darkness of the crawl space. I see the same eyes with the same eerie orange glow. I recently came across a listing for 40 acres of recreational land in a heavily forested area of Utah, approximately 9,000 feet above sea level. It was a great deal, only about $1,000 an acre, since the land had no utilities prepared and it wouldn't be ready to be built on for many years. It shared a border with approximately 2 million acres of BLM land, miles of forest that will never be torn down or harvested. It was perfect. A friend and I made a deal, and we went in 50/50ths on the land. We split the property but agreed we had no issues sharing our halves with each other since we are buddies, and want our families to always have fun experiences camping out there. I parked a camper on the land and we decided to split the cost to build a rustic cabin, basically a 400 SQ-foot cabin with a wood-burning stove, a porch, and some bunk beds. We decided to spend the night in the cabin, and we stayed up late talking about how we were excited to make the trip home and bring our families back for our first camping trip together. We must have fallen asleep. I awoke to the sound of someone rummaging through the back of my truck. We were a mile or two from the next parcel we knew someone else owned, so I was shocked someone was in our camp. I quietly woke up my buddy. The rummaging continued, followed by the sound of my suspension squeaking and hearing footsteps walk closer to the cabin. I could then hear the deep and guttural breathing, sounding powerful. We had built the cabin 1 foot off of the ground. We cut out a window approximately 7 feet high at the top of the window. It was a full moon, and our campground was well lit. The footsteps got closer, slowly, until I could see a large figure of a man standing in the window frame, just breathing. You would have to be a minimum of 6 feet tall range to be visible in that window. TBIS was a big dude. In an attempt to dispel our fear, my friend yelled, "Identify yourself, we're armed," refigure, then turned and walked away, never to visit us again. The next morning we found they, it may be, had thrown everything out of my truck and left all valuables. We found very large handprints on the windows of my truck, probably 25 to 33% bigger than my friend's hand, who is also a large man. We've started to think that perhaps who we encountered wasn't human. Okay, this incident happened in the summer of 1989. I have seen some absolutely incredible things. I have never seen a more bizarre incident than this. This happened on a farm in northeastern Tennessee. I would consider this a mountain story. I was a freshman in high school at this time. My normal nightly ritual was to sneak out of the house at night after everyone had went to sleep. I would grab my binoculars and head up to the new barn. Basically, I lived on a hill in the valley. I had a 360-degree vantage point. If there was something in the sky, I saw it. I saw a lot of weird stuff at night when I was alone. That's a whole other story. This night in particular, I didn't sneak out. I went to bed early. During the night, I was awoken by something. I didn't wake up naturally. I don't know what time it was. I didn't have an alarm clock. I never wore a wristwatch. I don't like the way it feels against my skin. When I had sat up in bed, I looked directly at my bedroom window. I'm not sure why, but I felt the need to look toward the window. I then got out of bed and walked over to my window. Now my window was opened and there was nothing between me and the outside but a screen. The moon was full. It illuminated everything in front of me. Looking back, that night was eerie, to say the least. I noticed a shadow moving away from my window. I looked up to the sky. It was clear. There was nothing in the sky that would cast this shadow. I looked back to the shadow. I could see the ground through the shadow. There was nothing in the shadow. No dog, no cat, no animals. I could not see what was casting the shadow. I'm not sure how to explain this properly. The shadow was there, but there was nothing around me to give off a shadow like this. There were no trees above me. For lack of a better word, it was invisible. The shadow was a perfect circle. The size was 20 inches x 24. The size of the shadow reminded me of a basketball when I saw it. There was no sound outside. It was dead silent. The crickets were not chirping. Because of the moonlight, the color of the shadow was light gray, not black. If it weren't for the moonlight, I would have never seen the shadow. The shadow moved slowly from my window to a tree that was 10 feet away, and then it stopped. The tree was 3 to 4 inches in diameter, about 5 feet tall. This shadow moved in a straight line. It never wavered. The circumference of the shadow never changed. As the shadow moved slowly towards the tree, it had to cross gravel, but never made a sound. I watched the shadow by the tree for about 1 minute. I then said softly, "I can see you." The shadow then moved around the tree to the right and continued moving in a straight line away from me. I watched the shadow to the point where I could no longer see it anymore. I've always found this incident disturbing. Whatever this thing is, decided that it was a good idea to be at my window, watching me. I would like to mention some key elements in this mystery. 1. This was a solid object, casting a shadow on the ground. 2. This object was not on the ground, it was in the air. The shadow crossed the gravel without making a sound. 3. I could not see this object. So how did the crickets see it? They weren't chirping. When you walk towards a cricket, it will stop chirping when it sees you. 4. The shadow moved in a straight line wherever it went. That takes a mind, that takes control. 5. Why did the shadow stop at the tree? What was it waiting on? A response, a reaction? Did it want me to come outside? It makes no sense. This is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. There are 2 other incidents that may tie into this one, not sure yet. Thank you for letting me share my story. I grew up in Russia. I didn't know anything about Native American stories. As far as I knew, it was the classics, Bigfoot, Mothman, etc. When I turned 20, I moved to Utah to start fresh, so to speak. I remember dating this girl who was Native and telling me about these stories and what to do to protect myself from them. But me, being a skeptic, ignored it. I bought this property on the outskirts of town near a forest a couple 100 feet around. Before breaking off into Badlands, I go hunting and wood collecting in these forests all the time. After about a month of living in this house, I started noticing weird prints in the grass and mud. But the thing that got me was it was footprints and handprints. So I shrugged it off, thinking it was city kids trying to punk the foreigner. After about 2 weeks later, I started noticing the footprints and such getting closer to the house. So eventually weeks went by, nothing, so I went hunting and killed a deer to feed myself a couple of weeks. That night, all I could smell was just irony, coppery smell like blood after it set for a time. My dog I named Kazan. He's an Anatolian shepherd. I've seen this dog kill coyotes and badgers easily. Was sitting in my bed growling at the window the entire night. In the morning I went outside to see the deer carcass I disposed of was broken. The ribs, leg bones were just snapped like it was nothing. That day I went to the town's Native Americans and started asking if any one thing can do that. They all said nothing. After several weeks went by, I go hunting. But the moment I step in the woods, nothing, dead silence, nothing, not even birds or insects. I figured it was because I stepped in the woods and were all checking me out. After a while I find a spot in the woods up a tree in my stand. Still nothing but silence, but this time the overwhelming smell of iron again. Where I was almost gagging, about 30 yards to my left, I see an object cruising at a good speed. Then it comes to a dead stop and stands up a good 3 meters tall and sticks its elk skull head with antlers straight up, then lowers it and looks around till our eyes meet. In my mind I had the same like voice on my left going, "Run. Just leave." My mind was screaming at me to leave. It was then I realized this thing is the thing talking me and checking me out. I've noticed if I kill something in those woods and don't leave something for it, it comes to my property and watches me. I've caught it in the corner of my eye, off in the forest, just sat watching me, waiting for me to do something. I was reminded of this by an upcoming storm, and I figured I should share this story. This takes place about 4 years ago, right at the beginning of the biggest snowstorm of my life. It was February, and in my home state of Massachusetts, we're no strangers to snow. At this point, there was already a good foot of snow on the ground from previous storms. Right before the storm started, I figured I should dig up some of the snow that had collected in the chicken run. It was early morning, and as I was getting ready to go out, I noticed that the motion sensor light had gone off next to the chicken coop. I looked around the yard from my window and didn't see anything. As I went to the door, my cat Alfred got in front of the door and was looking at me. He was a strictly indoor cat, so it wasn't like he was asking to go outside. I gently moved him aside with my foot, but he got right back in front of the door. He usually wasn't like this, so I thought it was strange. I figured he wanted attention, so I picked him up, setting him on a chair. I went outside onto my back deck. Now my yard is narrow, a maybe 30 feet by 200 strip of grass and garden that had been slowly being taken over by the forest behind my house. At the end of my yard there was a steep hill covered in trees that led up to the rest of the forest. The chicken run was about 10 feet from the deck, so I went over and got to work, letting them out for a bit and feeding them before staring to shovel. When I was about halfway done, one of my chickens, a Rhode Island red named Red, started squawking. I've heard these chickens squawk before. My 2 buff Orpington chickens always did before they laid an egg, but this was more of an alarm call, and I hadn't heard this type of noise since my dad's dog tried to attack them. I was outside the run, dumping a bucket of snow into a pile. I looked up at the chickens. They were all along the back fence of the run, looking at something on the hill. I looked at the top of the hill, and what I saw still gives me chills to this day. There was a big black dog-like thing sitting at the top of the hill staring down at me. I froze, looking back at it. I knew the animals in my area, and the 2 main things that would make sense for it to be a fisher cat or a coyote were too small to be it. We stared at each other for a few minutes, its yellow eyes glowing in the early morning light before it stood up onto its hind legs and turned and ran into the forest. I ran back into my house, slamming the door shut and locking it. I still don't know what that thing is, but I am reminded of it whenever the motion sensor light goes off or my neighbor's dogs start barking. I hope to never see it again.